I was going on a camping trip with my best friend. I'm gonna call him Henry. We'd done a few trips before, but we still mostly considered ourselves new to it. We hadn't done anything too crazy up until this point. Usually we'd go to local campgrounds that had other people around, but we thought we were confident enough to do something more adventurous. Both of us wanted to camp at an actual campsite that was cool, with a view and further in the forest. You know, like real camping. We did some research and found a place about 3 hours from us. It was a 4-hour hike into the forest, and it only had a couple pictures from previous campers, so it didn't seem like it'd be busy. We drove down there, prepared for 3 days. There was a very small dirt area on the end of an otherwise unused road in the middle of the forest. Nobody else was parked there. The trail looked like an actual trail, or at least it looked like it was one at some point. It hadn't been kept up with, so some parts were overgrown and weathered. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere, it seemed, so I wasn't expecting the most taken care of trail, but this looked like it was abandoned for years. Still, we kept walking. It thinned out as we got further into the forest, but around mid-afternoon, we got to the campsite. It was no more than a grassy area on top of a small hill, but it had a decent overlook of the forest, and was very secluded. Nobody else was there, and from the looks of it, nobody had been there in a long time. We set up our tents and got everything unpacked. Henry was taking a bit longer than me, so while I waited, I walked up to the overlook and just enjoyed the view. While I was there, I noticed something move in the trees below us. It was really hard to see through the dense branches and leaves, but I barely caught a glimpse of a group of people walking, maybe 4 or 5 of them. I was so surprised to see other people out here, especially not on the campsite. From where I was though, I couldn't see anything aside from their basic figures moving through the forest, so I couldn't tell if they were campers or hikers or what. I tried to point them out to Henry, but by the time he came over, they were already gone, disappeared in the forest. After a few minutes, we were back to going about our day. We kind of just hung out for the next few hours, talking and whatever, until the sun started going down. We built up a small campfire and sat around it. The night was calm for the first couple hours. It was quiet, only the sound of us talking and the crackling campfire between us. But then we heard something else. It was faint, but we both heard it. It sounded like voices, multiple, talking back and forth. We couldn't tell what they were saying, or even if they were speaking our language. It was coming from way out in the trees though, which made it really creepy. Henry and I didn't know what to do, so we just listened for a bit, but the voices didn't seem to move. They stayed in the same spot out there, until they suddenly went quiet. The next minute or so was really unnerving. We didn't hear the voices fade out or leave. They just stopped, like they were still right out there. Then there were footsteps, just one set walking toward us. A few seconds later, a man came out of the dark and into the light of our campfire. He had a distinct red baseball cap and longish wavy black hair. His smile was wide as he walked up to us. "Either of you know where the trail is around here? I've been looking for a while." I said yeah, and pointed ahead at the trail. But when he didn't immediately say anything or leave, I then asked if the others out there were with him. His face fell flat for a moment. Then he smiled again and looked back at where I was looking. "I didn't know there were others out here. I've just been hiking alone. I would have asked them for directions if I saw them," the man said. It was really strange though. I was almost sure he was lying. He came from the same direction we just heard the voices in. I just said okay, and he smiled. then left and went down the trail. Henry was thinking the exact same thing as I was, that the guy was lying for some reason. There was no way he just came out from the same area as the group of voices and wasn't with them, or at least didn't even notice them. But the more unsettling question is, why was he lying? Why didn't he want to tell us about the others in the forest? We discussed this around the campfire for a while, maybe 30 minutes, trying to figure out what the hell was going on, or if there even was something going on. The whole time, it felt like we were being watched. I kept turning around and looking at the forest and at the trail. Something felt wrong. It definitely didn't help that this was our first time being so far out like this, so nerves were already high.
Should we just leave?
Henry finally said in a shaken voice. After some thought, I said yes. We started packing, but that eerie feeling only felt like it was getting stronger. Just as we tossed our bags on our shoulders and stomped out the campfire, a single footstep crunched in the leaves behind me. We both swung our heads around. Without the fire, it was pitch black. It also felt like the woods were eerily quiet now. After a moment, my shaky hand reached into the side of my backpack and got out my flashlight. I pointed it out and clicked it on. Standing only 10 or 15 feet in front of me was that same guy from before with the red baseball hat. He was standing in place, already looking at us, and had a blank stare. As I held the light on him, he made that same wide smile from before. In a panic, I turned off the light and both of us sprinted to the trail. Disturbingly, I could hear multiple other footsteps chasing behind us, and some even sounding like they were running through the woods beside us. Slowly though, they started to fade out. Eventually, it was just us two, running down the dark trail. We made it back to the car unharmed. We got in and drove away. We were both pretty shaken for a while after that. Honestly, I have no idea what was going on there. Why was anyone there at all? It's been a long time since this happened, but we haven't been out camping at all. I don't know if we ever will. I was 16. I had just gotten a job at a pizza place about 6 months ago, and during that time, I saved up enough to buy a cheap car. I hated not being able to drive myself, but also I wanted to do deliveries instead of working inside the shop. It was a regular weeknight. I got in after school at 5 and was scheduled until 10:30. It was busy for the first couple hours, but by 8 it abruptly slowed down. There wasn't another delivery to be made until 9. It was an online order for just 2 medium pizzas. I picked it up and started driving. It wasn't busy out, just a few cars here and there. But once I got about 5 minutes out from the neighborhood, a car pulled onto the road from a side street and came up behind me. The roads were empty, and they could have easily passed me if they wanted to, but they stayed right behind me. I didn't really think about it. I mean, to be honest, I didn't care at all at the time. Throughout the next 5 minutes, they stayed right behind me. When I took the turn into the neighborhood, I looked in my mirror. After a few seconds, their headlights appeared, turning down the road. That's a pretty big coincidence. What were the chances that the only other car on the road was going to the same small neighborhood as me? I guess it was very possible, but it got me feeling a little more aware of the situation. I kept driving. This street was through the woods, with individual houses spread out on either side of the road. Some were right up on the road, and some were down longer driveways. As I got deeper into the neighborhood, finally my headlights lit up a mailbox that had the right address on it. I turned into the driveway. I checked my mirrors again, and a few seconds later, the car passed right by and continued down the road. I remember feeling relieved and silly for thinking anything of it. I drove to the end of the driveway. It wasn't too long, maybe like 200 feet or something. I pulled up and got out with the pizzas. I gave the door a couple knocks. Nobody answered the door for a minute, and while the porch light was on, it didn't look like any of the inside lights were on. I knocked again. About 30 seconds passed. Then a light shined through the window, and a few seconds later, a woman answered the door. She looked like she was in her early 30s and was wearing a nightgown, and she looked really tired. Immediately, something about this felt wrong.
I had these pizzas ordered to this address.
I then read out the address to her, but she looked annoyed. The woman said she didn't order anything and was trying to sleep. She was definitely a little cranky, but it was clear there was some kind of mistake. I apologized and walked off the porch. I was kind of spaced out for a moment, looking at the ground and thinking about how weird this was as I walked back to my car. But about halfway there, I looked up and felt a chill rush through me. There was a car sitting right behind mine. It was the same one that I thought was following me. Its headlights were off, but I could see the fog coming from the exhaust, so the car was still on. I felt really uncomfortable. Did they also live here with the woman and were just pulling in? Or did it have something to do with the order? Everything just felt really off, like too coincidental. I knew something was wrong. I continued walking to my car, hoping they would see me and either say something or move. I got in and tossed the pizzas on the passenger seat and turned my car on, but they stayed there. The driveway was thin. There wasn't really any space to go around them, but I pulled further up toward the house and turned around. Surely they would see that I was trying to leave now. They still remained right in the middle of the driveway, blocking the exit. There was about 30 seconds as I faced their car and they faced me, and we both just sat there. During that time, I kind of put everything together. Them driving behind me, following me into the neighborhood, and the creepy, sudden appearance of them blocking the driveway. None of this was a coincidence. I felt my body start to go numb as my heart started pumping in my chest. I didn't know what to do. Then, their car doors opened. 4 men got out. They all had hoodies and hats on, covering pretty much their whole faces. One of them had their hand suspiciously tucked into his hoodie pocket, like he was holding on to something. They started running up to my car, and I panicked. I hit the gas, trying to go around them and past their car, but there wasn't enough room. The wheels went off the driveway, and I skidded in the dirt, ramming into a tree. It was a pretty slow hit. The airbags didn't even go off or anything, and I don't think the car was stuck. But I didn't take any chances. I jumped out and started running. I heard one of them chasing me and yelling to the others, but they turned back after a little bit. When I was safe, I stayed in the woods and called 911. When the officers got to the home, all of the men and both cars were gone. My car was never recovered, even to this day. What essentially happened was the group used some random address to lure me into by ordering a pizza, hoping to trap me in. What they were going to do with me is unknown. The fact that one of them chased me makes me think they didn't plan on letting me go. I got lucky that night. This was last winter. I can't recall exactly when, but I know it was snowing a lot during this week, and I barely left the house because of it. I worked what I think is called hybrid, so sometimes from home and sometimes in the office. Because of the snow, I stayed home this whole week and worked from a small desk in my bedroom. My house was small, only 1 story, and just 2 bedrooms. On this day, I got up and made coffee, then sat down to work, and pretty much stayed at my desk until 8 p.m. It was windy and snowing outside the whole day. When I finally got up, I made dinner, then cleaned up around the house, then went outside to bring the trash bins down to the curb. As I was walking back to the front door, I noticed the snow on the left side of my house looked strange. Like everywhere else, it was piled up and flat, but over there, something clearly had messed with it. So I walked over to get a closer look, and could quickly recognize that it was a line of shoe prints going through the snow. This was a little concerning, because it was really close to my house, not just like kind of in the area. I followed the prints, going all the way down the side of my house, until there were suddenly no more. At the end, it looked like they'd moved around in this one spot for a while, and it was directly outside the window to my bedroom that I was working in. This was extremely creepy. I mean, it was cold, windy, and snowing. Why was anyone even outside walking around to begin with, and going up to my window? Thankfully, I had the blinds shut, but you could still kinda see through the cracks. Right on the other side of the window was my desk, so they could have been watching me. I hoped I was just overthinking it. I went back inside and warmed up. I didn't exactly know what else to do about it. Obviously, they weren't there anymore, so there was nothing to do. I continued with my night, eventually going to bed around 11. I had checked out the window one last time before sleeping, and the snow had covered up all the tracks from before, and there were no new ones, so I felt better. I triple-checked that it was locked, then got in bed. I slept through the night. The first thing I did once I woke up was go over to the window and check again. My tired face immediately woke up. There were fresh prints in the snow again, right by the window. I quickly threw on my jacket and snow boots and ran outside. The prints were almost exactly the same as before, going up to the side of my house and piling up right under my window. I looked around at the empty blanket of snow that covered the rest of the ground near my house, but there were no signs of anything else or anyone nearby. I went back inside. I ended up calling the non-emergency police number to report what was going on. I knew they wouldn't be able to do anything, but I thought that at least if something did happen, they would be aware of the situation. After that, I had to work though. I tried to check out the window every so often, but the snow slowly filled in the shoe prints, and I never saw anything more. I got out of work at 8 again, so the sun had long set, and the night was cold and windy. I got up from my desk and went to the window, pushing aside the blinds and seeing flat, untouched snow. The relief I felt was immense. But my eyes floated down just as I was letting go of the blinds, and my heart nearly stopped. The latch was undone. It wasn't locked anymore. I couldn't believe it. I'd triple-checked it last night and never touched it since. I shakily reached my hand down and grabbed the handle. The window opened with ease. I felt my heart racing. They had to have unlocked it last time they were here, which was in the middle of the night. How did I not hear it? And did they get inside? I backed away and crept into the hallway. My eyes sifted through every inch of the hallway as I slowly made my way to the front door. I got my keys and put my boots on, then ran out to my car. I called the police and stayed in the driveway. I don't think my car could make it out of the snow, even if I wanted to leave. 10 long minutes later, an officer pulled up. He went inside to make sure it was clear. Time seemed to move extremely slow. I waited as the minutes passed. Once it got close to 5 whole minutes, I knew something was wrong. Then he finally came out with a man in handcuffs. Both the officer and the man were covered in blood, clearly having gotten into an altercation. The officer said he was hiding in a hallway closet and jumped him. The man was 45 and just had that creepy, evil look to him. There was no saying what he was trying to do, but clearly he was capable of violence. I don't know what would have happened had that gone on for any longer. I had this whole day off. It was cold and wet outside, as it had been raining off and on all day. I stayed in and played video games, going about my day as I normally would. Around 5, the rain had picked up, and there was a bit of lightning in the distance. I cooked up some dinner, then decided to watch a horror movie, while I had the fitting ambience of the storm outside. I shut off the lights and spent the next 2 hours on the couch. The storm definitely got worse over that time. There weren't any outages or anything, but it was just really coming down hard outside, with heavy lightning strikes nearby. It was around 10 o'clock. I wasn't really tired or ready for bed yet, but I got up to stretch my legs and refill my water. When I turned around toward the hallway, I immediately saw something move, like a shadow on the wall. It was quick, just a split second, too short for me to really understand what I saw, or even be sure that what I saw was real. I froze in place for a moment, then walked over and looked around, only to find nothing but an empty hallway. Maybe it was a flicker of light coming through the window from a far-off lightning strike. I also just got finished with the horror movie, so I could have been a little on edge and just seeing things. I honestly chalked it up to nothing and forgot about it after less than a minute. I refilled my water and checked on the storm going on outside. The trees were blowing around like crazy, and the rain was basically flooding the roads. We didn't get many big storms like this around here, so it was always interesting when we did. Our town definitely wasn't built for them. I went back to the couch and turned on YouTube to try and ease myself into getting sleepy. I wasn't too tuned in to what I was watching. I guess I was kind of spacing out or whatever. But then again, I saw a shadow on the wall behind the TV move. It was like something behind me just peeked around the corner for a split second. I jolted my head around and looked at the opening to the living room. Nothing was there. I got up and walked over, looking all around that area, but I saw nothing at all. I didn't know what the hell was going on. It was like I was just seeing things, but I never had it happen twice like that before. Was I just sleepy? I didn't feel like it. I thought that the horror movie and the storm outside would make for a chill night, but this was far from it now. I still thought it was nothing, but there was that tiny feeling in the back of my mind that it wasn't nothing. I spent another 15 minutes on the couch, but decided to go to bed afterward. I shut off the TV and headed upstairs. I still wasn't tired, and even less so after everything happening, so I hopped in the shower to relax myself before getting in bed. I turned on the water and tried to calm down. I was in there for maybe 5 minutes. Through the water, a sudden thud rang through the house. It was violent and loud, vibrating through the floors. My whole body shivered as I shut off the water and quickly got dressed. With the water off, the house was quiet now, not even the slightest sound. I felt like my ears were ringing just from the disturbing silence that followed the thud. I slowly made my way into the hallway and then down the stairs. I walked through the living room and then the kitchen. The back door was barely hanging on from the top hinge, completely open, and splinters of wood covered the floor under it. The two other hinges looked like they were ripped out of the wooden doorway. I ran up to my room and called 911, locking myself in the bathroom. That whole time I waited, I thought I was trapped inside my home with someone, but when the cops arrived, we quickly realized that wasn't the case. The door wasn't ripped off the hinges from the outside, it was from the inside. It was like someone angrily left, swinging the door open so hard that it slammed back into the wall and ripped the screws out of the doorway. Whoever it was had been inside my house that whole night. Likely the shadows I saw were them inside my home, probably moving as soon as I looked at them. I have no idea how long they were there for, or what they were doing in my home, watching me for. It's also really strange that they destroyed my door like that, like they were frustrated. I've never slept well in this house since then. This was in mid-November of last year. I had just gotten laid off due to budget cutting at the office. Luckily, I had some money saved up to cover for me while I searched for a new job. For several weeks, I was stuck at home, just looking through lists of job openings on my laptop. After the first 2 weeks, though, I started to get a bit impatient. I applied to pretty much every position I was interested in, and I hadn't gotten a single response. I ended up trying to look on different websites from the usual ones. One of them I had a bit more luck on, finding a few new ones to apply to, and later in the day I finally got an email from one of them. The manager introduced himself as Zach, and in the email he said his schedule was pretty packed, but he wanted to get an interview with me that night if possible. I wasn't fully prepared, nor did I feel comfortable enough to ask why it had to be tonight, but I definitely didn't want to let this slip by without trying. I thought showing up on short notice would be a good way to show my commitment. The job was just some regular sales job from the looks of it, but the pay was worth it. I agreed to the interview, and Zach sent me the address and said to be there at 7:30. I got ready and headed over, arriving 15 minutes early. I didn't have any time to research the place or anything, so I wasn't all too sure what to expect. The place it had me pull into was the parking lot of a small building. It wasn't obvious from the outside what the building was for. It only had an address number on it. I mean, I assumed it was just an office, because it was a sales job, but it was hard to say because all the lights were off. The parking lot was also empty. Something felt wrong. I checked the address again and looked it up, and it came back to the same spot. The building had no name on Google either. I called the phone number attached to the email that Zach sent me. He didn't pick up. I called a couple more times and still got no answer. I waited until 15 minutes past the scheduled time, then decided to leave. Dark, empty building with nobody in the parking lot, and getting no reply from the interviewer. The whole thing felt sketchy, and in hindsight, I should have been more aware to the possibility. I drove home. I was upset about the waste of time, but overall, I just wanted to move past it. I told myself I'd stick with the regular job search websites and would continue the search in the morning. I wasn't sure if Zach gave me the wrong address on accident, or what really happened, but I didn't waste more of my time thinking about it. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the couch, cracking it open and turning on the TV. With no job, I had no bedtime, so I pretty much just chilled on the couch until I felt sleepy. Throughout the hours, though, I kept hearing something upstairs, just like a creak in the ceiling. I checked out the window a couple of times to see if it was windy outside, but it wasn't at all. The creaking didn't concern me really. It didn't sound abnormal by any means. I think I got tired around 10 p.m. I shut off the TV and the downstairs lights, then walked upstairs to the bedroom. The last thing I remember was getting in bed and laying down, falling asleep really quickly, before suddenly I was awake again. My eyes were opened to the pitch black room. As I laid there, I heard that same creak sound that I'd been hearing. It was close to me, like somewhere on the other side of the room. I looked over with my tired eyes, barely seeing anything in the dark. But then there was the slow and quiet sound that I recognized as the closet sliding open. My eyes opened a little more, seeing just the outline of the closet door slowly opening. I felt almost like I was frozen, just stuck in place, unable to move as I watched this happen. My mind wasn't fully convinced this was even real. It wasn't until the closet stopped moving and a figure leaned out from behind it that my body jerked out of the frozen state I was in. I grabbed my phone and jumped out of bed, opposite to the side the closet was on. The figure didn't move though. They just stood still and stared at me, almost like they were hoping I somehow didn't see them. Standing up though, and with my eyes adjusted, I was 100% sure what I was seeing was real. I ran out of the room and left my house as I spoke to a 911 operator. It was probably dumb of me, but I stood in my front yard and watched through my front door at the staircase. I didn't want whoever was in there to leave without getting caught. Obviously, they could have been dangerous and armed, so it wasn't the smartest decision. A few minutes later, 2 cops showed up. I never saw anyone come down the stairs, so I told them where I last saw the guy. They went in and found him still hiding in the closet. When they pulled him out and dragged him into the car, I couldn't believe how disturbing this guy looked. Oily, long and messy hair, disgusting clothes, and these wide, unfriendly eyes. He didn't say a single word as to what he was doing, but it only took a couple days to get the whole story. He had made these fake job listings on multiple sites. There were actually hundreds of fake listings he made, all for different types of jobs. Disturbingly, he had all my info from the resume I sent in, and he knew exactly when I'd leave my house for the interview, so he broke in while I was gone. That whole night, he was in my home with me, and just a couple feet away while I was sleeping. However, we still never got an answer as to what he was planning to do. Without him outright saying it, there's no way for me to ever know what was going to happen that night. I'm 32 and work for a trucking company. This was around the holidays. The roads weren't too bad for the most part, but driving in winter was always a little bit more tiring. This day, or night rather, was normal. I left town at 6 p.m. to deliver a load 2 states away. At about 11 p.m., I made my first stop. I pulled into a small truck stop on the side of the road, just to use the bathroom and grab a coffee, and maybe rest my eyes for a little bit. I parked and went into the building, then came back out with my coffee and hopped back into the driver's seat. I took a moment to myself and just sat there, taking a few sips and looking around. Only a couple other trucks were in the parking lot. Guess it was a quiet night. As I sat there, I happened to spot someone at the back of the building. The lights were dim back there, but some guy was leaning against the wall and looking out in my direction. I couldn't see his eyes, but my truck was the only one parked over here. There was nothing else to look at. I minded my own business and just kept sipping my coffee, but every time I looked back, the guy was still looking over here. I was sure it was nothing, but it still felt too weird for me to get any shut-eye. Snow was starting to come down as well. I put my drink in the cup holder and started up the truck, then pulled out and began the next section of the drive. The coffee definitely kicked in, keeping my eyes open. The roads were completely empty. About 30-ish minutes down the road, a light glimmered in my side mirror for just a moment, like a glint reflecting off of something behind my trailer. I kept checking my mirrors, thinking it was a car coming up, but there was nothing behind me that I could see. Maybe it was a broken reflector on the road or something. I didn't know. The snow was beginning to pile up a bit on the road though, so for the next while I was more focused on what was ahead of me, making sure I made it in one piece. I think a good hour or so went by. Focusing on the road was getting more exhausting with every minute, but then again there was a quick glint in my side mirror. I only barely shifted my eyes quick enough to catch what it was. There was a car right behind my trailer, like so close that it was completely covered in my mirrors. Its headlights were off too, so only when it was slightly off to the side did my headlights reflect onto theirs, creating that little glint I was seeing. I was no stranger to having people tailgating me for going slow, but this was really strange though, in this weather being that close to me and with no headlights. What were they doing? After a minute or two of thinking about it, I thought it best to get away from them, or at least keep them off my tail, for both of our safety. I merged into the other lane, but the car followed. Confused, I merged back into the right lane. This time I think they got the hint that I was on to them, and they stayed on their side. They started to slow down though, and eventually they fell out of sight. I didn't have a clue what they were doing, but at least they were off my back. I drove on the quiet road through the snow for another 2 hours. It was around 3 a.m., and I decided to pull off at a rest stop to get a few hours of shut-eye. It was just one of those little cutaways off the road that could fit maybe 2 or 3 semis. There was no building or restrooms, it was just a parking area. I parked, cut off the engine, leaned my chair all the way back, and closed my eyes. I dozed off pretty fast. I was used to being limited on sleep, so every minute counts. The calm winds and snow trickling down definitely helped though. I planned to wake up whenever the sun came up, so like 3-ish hours, but I woke up before that. I slowly opened my eyes, seeing the dark truck cabin and the faint highway lights in front of me. I was still really tired. I didn't know why I woke up. After a second, I rolled my body over to reposition myself, but was instantly met with the eyes of something outside my window. They were staring in at me with disturbingly wide, creepy eyes. I almost fell out of my seat, but the guy didn't even flinch. He just stepped down and tried to open the door, but after a few tries, I heard his footsteps rushing away in the snow. I used the radio to call for help, and moments later, a car drove out from behind my truck. It was the same one that was on the road before. I gave as much of a description as I could, and it was as the officers asked me to go over everything that happened that night that I remembered the man I saw watching me at the truck stop. Maybe it was him this whole time. But why was he stalking me? And what was he trying to do? I never found out. I was driving alone from my friend's place all the way back home. He lived about an hour away at some really remote house. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. I can't remember exactly, but I was really tired and almost just wanted to sleep over at his place. I would have had to call off work though, which wasn't really an option. Because of where he lived, most of the drive was through large farmlands. I had some music playing to keep myself awake, and I just stared at the empty road ahead. About 20 minutes in though, my headlights lit up something right in the middle of the road. I slowed down, slamming on my brakes a bit harder than I had to. It was a suitcase, like a full, unopened suitcase, just standing up in the middle of the road. I probably stared at it for an odd amount of time because I was so tired and caught off guard by it. I decided to just go into the oncoming lane and go around it. I really wasn't in the mood to get out and move it or anything. It was definitely odd that it was standing upright like that, but it had to have just fallen out of someone's truck and happened to land like that. I couldn't think of any other reason. I kept driving, thinking about it for a little bit, but ultimately forgetting about it pretty quickly. Maybe 5 minutes passed. The roads were still quiet. I was just cruising along, but then again, something came up in my headlights. This time, it was a truck, parked in the middle of the lane. None of its lights or blinkers were on. If I didn't have my high beams on, this could have been dangerously close. I stopped behind them and waited for a second, then honked a few times. The truck didn't move at all. I didn't even see any movement inside of it through the back window. After waiting for 30 seconds, I started to slowly go around it. As I did, I noticed it had a few large dents and scrapes on the side. I couldn't tell if it was from a recent accident or not. It could have been one of those old trucks that just never repaired any of its parts. More concerning though, I didn't see anyone inside the truck. It was still dark looking through the windows, but I didn't see any shape or outline of anyone sitting in either the front or the back. I pulled further up and in front of it, getting back onto my side of the road, then slowed even more to look around. It was still just farmland in all directions. Why would someone park right there and leave their vehicle? There was nothing here. I felt strange about it, kind of creeped out honestly. I continued down the road. I just had a bad feeling about it, and I didn't want to stay too long to see it through. After that, I was definitely more awake. Was the suitcase and the truck somehow connected, or were they both just conveniently in the middle of the road? I never saw anyone on the side of the road going back to get the suitcase, so I don't know. But I only made it another minute before I was forced to stop for a third time. There was a person in the road. He was standing in my lane and waving his arms at me to stop. He looked early 40s and pretty disheveled. Messy hair, cuts and scrapes on his hands and arms, and overall just not in good shape. Once my tires stopped moving, he smiled and walked up to my window.
Hey, did you see a truck not too far back that way?
I said yes, I did.
Think you could give me a lift back there?
Before answering, I asked why it was parked in the road like that, and what he was doing out here, which I felt like given the circumstance, these were reasonable questions to ask. The man stumbled over his words for a second, before settling on saying he ran out of gas and was trying to walk to a gas station. But then, why would I drive him back to the truck? Wouldn't he have asked me to drive him to the gas station? He kept talking though, like he wasn't letting me think too hard about it. Now it was me stumbling over my words, trying to think of an excuse to say no, but my eyes wandered behind him and happened to see something sticking out of the crops on the side of the road. It looked like the tail end of a small car. It was deep into the crops. I could only see one of the rear headlights slightly reflecting the light from my car. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I knew whatever it was wasn't good. I rolled the window up, and the man instantly went from smiling to frowning. His eyes widened, and he started yelling and hitting the window. I pulled away and sped down the road. I got my phone out quickly after and called the cops. Reportedly, the truck was gone when they got there, but the car I saw in the crops was still there, and I guess the scene was far worse than I imagined. That was someone else's car, and the driver in it was no longer alive. Not from a crash, though. It seemed they likely picked up a hitchhiker, the guy I saw, and unfortunately, that was the last thing they ever did. It's assumed that the suitcase and the truck in the road had something to do with getting the car to pull over and pick him up. It's not for certain, though, but obviously the hitchhiker I saw was not telling the truth about his truck running out of gas. It all likely was just an act of violence by some crazy guy for no real reason, which makes it even more terrifying that I was that close to him, and he wanted me to let him in my car, just like the other guy had. The man was never identified. I used to do deliveries as kind of a side gig in my 20s. It's been a while since then, but I always remembered this one incident that happened during that time. This night, an order was put in at our restaurant at 9, and I went to drop it off around 9:20. I had no reason to believe this was anything other than a regular delivery order. The only slight difference was that it was a little bit farther than usual, being 20 minutes away. It was also 20 minutes in the other direction of most of the residential areas of our town. Our shop was near the edge, so this was just going into what I thought was a pretty barren area outside of town. Regardless, the address looked like it was just any other home address. I followed the directions, getting onto the highway. This wasn't like the typical huge 4-lane highways. It was just a 1-lane road that led from our town through the forest into the next town over. Everyone still called it the highway, though. I knew there were some older neighborhoods and houses off this road, so I figured it was going to be one of them. I drove on that road for 15 minutes. It was pretty dead out there at that time of night. When the directions came to an end, though, I was taken aback. It didn't tell me to turn anywhere. It just stopped at a seemingly random point in the road and said my destination was on the right. I pulled off to the side, at least to just figure out what was going on. I tried searching up the address on Google Maps and then on Apple Maps, and both of them led to exactly where I was on the road. I thought maybe I was missing something. I rolled down the window and looked out at the side of the road, but all I saw were trees. It looked like a forest and nothing else. No dirt driveways or lights or anything. I decided to just call the customer and ask where the hell his house was, or if there even was a house, because honestly, part of me was thinking this was some kind of joke. The phone rang, and I put it up to my ear as I continued looking out at the forest. Only a second later, a light suddenly glowed from out in the trees. It wasn't bright, but still noticeable in the pitch-black woods. It went out after a moment though, and before I could think about it too much, a voice came through the phone, asking who was calling.
Hey, I got this order here, but I think we have the wrong address.
He asked me where I was, and I described the area to him. Oddly, his response was that it sounded like I was in the right place. He said there was a small driveway going into the woods. I told him I didn't see it, but he said it was hard to find and that I might have to get out to look for it. I sighed and said alright, then got out and walked to the other side of my car. I started asking which direction I should look, but he suddenly hung up on me. I thought that was pretty weird, but it was even more strange when I looked up and saw that glowing light in the forest again. It shut off after only a second. What the hell? That had to be the guy I was just talking to on the phone. Why was he just standing out there and not coming up to the road? And if he was out there, then why wasn't I seeing a driveway going in that direction? I looked back down, and I guess I saw what he was talking about. There was an extremely thin, rugged dirt line going into the woods. I say line because that's basically all it was. Definitely not a driveway. It looked like it was scrappily carved with a small shovel or something. There was no way in hell I was going to walk down that and into the forest, especially not with whatever was going on with the guy out there. I set the food on the ground, right on the side of the road. As I did, I started to hear leaves rustling from the bushes out in the forest. I hurried up and got in my car, then bailed out of there. Thankfully, I wasn't dumb enough to listen to the man on the phone and go into the woods. Something was wrong. I could feel it, but I didn't have anything to really prove it. What could have happened that night, I'll never know. I was working DoorDash this night. It was pretty late, like 12 or 1 a.m. I was used to staying up, so doing these late night deliveries was kind of normal for me. This night was slow. I was driving around and just listening to music while waiting for any orders to come through. When one finally did, I barely even looked at the details before accepting it, since I didn't have much options anyway. I drove up to the 24/7 McDonald's and picked up their order, then had the app set me on course for the drop-off location. It was 15 minutes from me. The whole drive was quiet. The roads were still, and I didn't really have any thoughts. I was just going through the motions. When I was a minute from arriving, it had me turn into I don't know what to call it. I guess it was a business area, but it didn't look like a regular one. Usually these places with a bunch of business buildings were nice, like well landscaped and taken care of, but this place wasn't. Most of the buildings looked old and unused, and the grass and bushes around them were overgrown and untrimmed. It was strange. The map had me turn into a parking lot where a small office building was. It looked like it was only one story, and was just as old and out of shape as the other places. I had done deliveries to office buildings before, or people at work, so this was nothing out of the ordinary, really. It was just the strange nature of this area that had me put off. The map had me pull into what looked like the back of the building, though it was kind of hard to tell. I looked at the directions to see if maybe there was more info, but then a message popped up from the customer. They said they saw me pull in and to bring it up to the gray metal door on my side of the building. I said alright and pulled up next to the building, then got out with the bag. As I walked up to it, I could tell this was definitely the back of the office. There was no main door, it was just a bunch of random doors, like a fire exit door and a bunch of back access doors. I found the one they were talking about though. It was a gray metal door with no windows or markings or anything. As I approached it, my phone got another message. He just said to bring it right inside for him. I kinda just shrugged it off and did as he said, not thinking too hard about it. I opened the door and stepped in. It was a hallway, but the main lights weren't on. It was just what I guess were the low energy lights. Small, dim light bulbs spread out down the hallway. Honestly, I was expecting some sort of room, or like a counter or something, that would be an obvious place for me to put the food. Was I supposed to just walk further into the building, or was he gonna meet me here? I pulled my phone back out to text him when I heard a click behind me. I turned and looked at the door. I pulled on the handle, but it was stuck. Someone just locked me in. All the blood rushed from my face. What did I just get myself into? I dropped the bag and tried harder to open the door, but it didn't budge at all. My only option was to go further down the hallway and hope I could find another way out before whoever was out there finds their way to me. Just as I started making my way down the hallway, I heard a door open and close from somewhere on the other side of the building. I hurried, running to the end and finding another door. When I opened it, there was another dimly lit hallway with a bunch of rooms on either side. I went in, but immediately heard something from the other end, so I made a split-second decision and slipped into one of the office rooms and hid. A few seconds later, footsteps came rushing through the hall and right up to the door to the hallway I just came from. They went in, running down toward the locked door. I made a run for it, going the direction the person came from and hoping to find the exit. Thankfully, I did. I ran back out to my car and drove out of there. Unfortunately, I don't think the officer on the phone understood the situation fully because they didn't get an officer there for 20 minutes. Nobody was there by then. However, I was informed that the office building was not in service at the moment, or hadn't been for the last 5 or so years. It was like partially abandoned, I guess. No cameras or anything. What exactly would have happened if I hadn't been quick enough to leave that hallway? Who knows? Definitely won't let myself get in a situation like that again, though. I used to work for Domino's. I only had the job for a couple of months, but for the most part, I didn't find it to be too bad. I ran pizzas back and forth from the shop and made extra from tips. This night, I got in at 8. Our store was always open until 12, and we got a surprising amount of orders that late, too. Like, we stayed steady throughout the night, all the way up until closing. This order came in toward the end of the night. I want to say around 11 or so. I was just running through the orders one after the other, so I grabbed this one and started heading down the road. It was in a direction I wasn't as familiar with, just because most of the orders came from the same general area. This one took me to the more spread out and woodsy part of town. I always thought this was where the rich people had their isolated mansions hidden in the trees, but at night, it didn't look like much of anything was out there. I drove until the directions told me to turn down a gravel road. It was wide and had lamps on the sides, guiding me down the whole way, and at the end it split off into 5 smaller paths, too thin for a car to fit down. There was a sign there that said something like, "Welcome to the Frosted Oak Cabins." It was a cabin rental property. I looked back at the address that was on the order, and it said Cabin 3 at the end. I looked at the signs next to each path, and found one that led to Cabin 3. These paths had dimmer and smaller lamps going along them, so I couldn't see down very far. I had no idea how long I was going to have to walk for. I parked the car and picked up the pizzas, then began walking. The dim lamps felt even worse as I got further in, because I almost couldn't see anything until I was right up next to one. So I'd be in the light for a few seconds, then walk blindly to the next one for a minute. I was worried I'd drop the food or trip on something. The woods were pretty calm though, just the sound of crickets and the leaves rustling in the wind. I think I walked for 3 or 4 minutes, though it felt like longer, before I made it to the last lamp and the end of the path. There was a little opening in a very small cabin in the middle. It had a window on the front, and oddly there was no light coming from it. The cabin was dark. I walked up and knocked on the door. I could hear the knock echo inside the cabin, but there wasn't the slightest sound in return. I pulled my phone out and called the number on the order. It rang for a whole minute and ended without anyone answering. I wasn't sure exactly what to do. I didn't want to walk all the way back for nothing. I looked out at the woods as I stood there, thinking about what else to do. Then I got a text. It was from the same number I just called. The text read,
I'm not at the cabin right now. The door is unlocked. Please leave the pizzas on the table inside. Thanks.
I turned and faced the door again, then twisted the handle. I pushed the door open just a little bit. I know they told me to, but it still felt kind of wrong. All the lights were off, and it was extremely dark.
Hello? Is anyone home?
With no reply, I pushed the door further open and took a few steps inside. It looked like just one long, open room, and maybe a small bedroom at the end. I went over to the table and started setting down the food when I heard a creak. My eyes shot over to the bedroom door, not getting to even think before it suddenly opened. I almost had a heart attack. I thought nobody was home. A man appeared in the doorway and started walking toward me as I nervously stuttered over my words. The man tried to tell me he had my tip and was thanking me for bringing it inside, but he was walking aggressively fast toward me. I backed up as he got just a couple feet away. He jumped forward, trying to grab me as his face shifted into rage. I ran out the front door, but instantly slammed into someone else. He fell in the grass, and I caught myself from falling, sprinting back to the path. I heard both of them chase after me, but every time I glanced back, they weren't within the light of any of the lamps. I made it to my car and sped out before they ever caught up to me. I called the police. Both men were gone, of course, but I was hoping that with the order, phone number, and cabin rental, they'd easily be able to identify them. However, they couldn't. They broke into the unrented cabin, used a fake phone number, and paid online with a Visa gift card. There was nothing to identify them with. Thinking back on what happened is almost more terrifying. Obviously, it was their plan to get me out there and into the cabin so they could trap me inside. But the other guy came out of nowhere. Was he out there in the woods, watching me the whole time, waiting for me to go in? Had he been just a moment faster, they would have succeeded, and I don't know what they would have done. I was staying at my friend's place for the weekend. She was away on a trip with her family, but she had a small cat that was afraid of thunderstorms, and this weekend we were supposed to get a really bad storm. Her cat was very independent though, usually just sitting alone in whichever room she felt like. It started storming the day before my friend left, and it continued throughout the whole weekend. This was on Saturday. I had spent the night there with no issues at all. Her cat, Molly, did fine with the storm. That morning, I enjoyed relaxing on her comfy couch and reading. I always loved staying at my friend's place because it was out in the woods. It felt so isolated and peaceful. Midway through the day, though, a call came in on the home phone. This was back when those were a common thing. I checked in case it was her trying to reach me, but it said unknown number, so I didn't answer. But a few minutes later, a call came through again. It said the same thing, unknown number. It rang out, but this time a voice came through on the answering machine. It was a quiet, male voice. They just said one word, my friend's name, as if asking if she could hear him. He then hung up after a couple seconds of silence. I didn't know if this was someone she was talking to, or like a family member or something, so I just texted her to let her know that someone called the home phone. I did find it strange that it came up as an unknown caller though. Over the next 3 hours, 2 more calls came in from that same number, but no more voice messages. My friend never responded either. I guess they were pretty busy. I didn't worry myself about it though. I figured it was nothing. I made food and really spent the rest of the day not doing much of anything. Later, say around 8 or 9, I found a movie to watch upstairs in the bedroom. I got about halfway through it before remembering to check on Molly and make sure she had food and water. I went downstairs, but was confused to see her standing right at the front door, staring at the crack in the doorway, like she was waiting for it to open. I called her name, and she looked at me, but only for a moment before looking back at the door. It kind of creeped me out, if I'm being honest. I walked up to the door and hesitantly looked out the peephole at the porch. The glass had fogged up from all the rain, so everything was blurry and I couldn't really make out anything. But then something moved, enough for me to tell there was something, or someone, standing on the other side of the porch. I felt a little unsettled, but I continued to watch, trying to get a clearer view of what I was seeing. I really wanted to know for sure if there was someone out there, but I also didn't want to open the door if there was someone there. 2 to 3 minutes went by without any changes in what I could see. I thought I was just scaring myself for no reason. After all, if someone was out there, they would have knocked on the door by now. I left the door to go check on Molly's food and water, and grab myself some snacks for the movie. When I passed by the door again, Molly wasn't there anymore. I looked out just to double check, and something looked different. It was still fogged up and blurry, but one of the shapes I saw wasn't there anymore, like it just disappeared. Was there really someone standing there the whole time? Feeling off about everything, I picked Molly up and brought her to the bedroom with me. I turned the movie back on and sat on the bed. The whole time the movie was playing, I couldn't shake a really unsettling feeling I had. 30 minutes went by, when suddenly Molly jumped off the bed and walked up to the bedroom door. She didn't scratch at it, or look back at me like she wanted to go out. She just stared at the crack in the doorway, exactly the same as she did at the front door, like someone was out there. My heart immediately started racing. I called her name in a shaky voice, but her focus was locked on the door. I got up from the bed and quietly walked over, then leaned my ear against the door. I couldn't hear anything. I then crouched down and peered under the crack between the floor. My whole body aggressively shot back. There was someone standing right outside the door, just a couple inches away. My eyes immediately looked at the doorknob. I had never even locked it. I snapped the lock down, and almost right away, the person on the other side ran away from the door. They went downstairs, where I could no longer hear anything. I called 911, then called my friend. By the time cops got there, the house was empty and nobody was around. With all the information, it seemed that the intruder was likely a stalker, probably the same one who kept calling. So they tried to trace the phone number, but had no luck. It was pretty much left at that. I feel bad for my friend because whoever that man was, he was definitely stalking her and not me. I don't know if it was just a coincidence that they showed up during the weekend she was gone, or if they were trying to break into what they thought would be an empty home. After all, I never answered the phone, so they probably were confident the house was empty. Maybe they were planning to wait and catch her off guard when she eventually got back from vacation. We never found out who they were or what they were doing. I live in the middle of nowhere. It's flat, barren farmland for miles in all directions. There's a main highway that's not too far from me, but that's about the only paved road around here. Everything else is dirt, or if you're lucky, gravel. Nearest town is 20 minutes away, and it isn't really much of a town. Anyway, I'm 44 and retired, so I spend most of my days at home. This was a regular, ordinary day for me. It was raining, which it had been for the last week, and I was inside going about my routine. Around noon, I decided to head out to my front porch to have a smoke and enjoy the falling rain. I don't know how long I sat out there for, probably an hour, when I noticed someone coming down the far dirt road that led up to my house. Again, it was flat land, so I could see pretty far, although the rain made it a bit more difficult. This person was on a bike though, like an ADV motorcycle or dirt bike, riding through the rain. I thought it was odd, but assumed they just mistook my driveway for being a dirt path. They kept coming down it though, until they were getting really close to my house. They basically got right up to where my garage was, before stopping. The man looked older, but was wearing a full-face helmet, and he was sitting on the driveway looking at my house until he noticed me. He watched me for a moment, then turned around and rode back the way he came. That was probably one of the strangest encounters I'd ever had on my property. Nobody ever comes down here, because they shouldn't. I had to assume it was just a mistake. I stayed out for a while longer, then the rain and wind started picking up, so I went back inside. I had almost entirely forgotten about the unforeseen visit earlier. I made another cup of coffee and relaxed inside. I was on a call with my brother for a while and took a nap as well. The day was chill, no errands to run or things to do around the house. The rain made a pretty sudden change around 8 p.m. though. There was thunder and lightning, and heavy downpour that thumped relentlessly against the old roof. But somehow through it, I heard the slightest sound of a heavy engine outside. It had that same dirt bike sound that was identical to the one that came by earlier in the day. I went up to my front window, seeing a headlight carving its way through the fog and rain. In the moment, I didn't even think about how crazy it was to be out riding at night in this awful weather, because all I could think about was why had they come back? As they got closer, they shut off their headlight, and instantly they disappeared. I couldn't see them at all. I waited, but they never came up to the garage like they did last time. Minutes went by without me seeing or hearing anything. Where could they have gone? Unfortunately, situations like these can't easily be called into the police station, so I was on my own. I grabbed my shotgun from the bedroom, which I only kept for self-defense. I had no idea what was going on, if they were lost or needed help, or if they were dangerous. All I knew was that I was alone in the middle of nowhere and needed to be extra cautious. I spent the next 20 minutes routinely checking out the windows on all sides of my property. I saw nothing more until I made another round, and when I looked out the back window, I just made out something in the fog. It quickly moved away. The eerie nature of it sent chills through me. Being unable to see anything and having no real way to know what was going on made it as unnerving as it could possibly be. Then I started hearing muddy footsteps outside my house, like right up against the house, splashing in the mud and water. Every time I tried to get a look out the window, they'd move out of the way. I really didn't know what to do here. I felt if I let this go on for too long, things could get even more unpredictable and possibly messy. Clearly, their intentions were not harmless. I went into the garage and got in my truck, then quickly opened the garage door, pulled out, and closed it. My body was shaking the whole time, praying this didn't escalate. I moved the truck further out front and spun around to face the house. Finally, I turned on the high beams and the bar lights on the front. It immediately lit up my entire house, and standing right outside of one of the windows was a man. He was in full black clothing and holding a hammer in his right hand. It looked like he was trying to look into the window and maybe didn't even hear me pull out of the garage under the thunder and rain. The man sprinted off behind the house. I saw him get on his bike, which was laying in the grass far off from the house. He rode off into the dark. I stayed up that entire night. The next day, I went into town and notified the sheriff's office of the encounter. I don't know who that was, but seeing the hammer in his hand, it seems clear he was trying to break inside and probably had malicious intent. Luckily, I didn't have to find out the hard way. This was only 2 years ago. In our town, there was this one house that had been abandoned for I think about 2 decades. It was an older place, nestled away in the trees, and after nobody would buy it, everyone just forgot about it. It slowly got covered up by the woods and left to rot. I was always interested in these types of places and loved to explore them. And one random afternoon I had off work, that's exactly what I did. I walked there with a small backpack and a flashlight. Usually I'd go with friends, but this house was so close by and seemed less significant than other places we'd been to, so I didn't bother. The driveway going into the woods was almost completely gone. Grass had grown over the gravel. I marched my way through it, eventually taking my flashlight out so I could see better. The house was deeper into the woods than I'd remembered. I felt like I walked for 5 or 6 minutes before getting there. It was an old wooden home, built before garages were even a thing. I guess it kind of looked like a large 2-story cabin. I walked up to one of the front windows, which was broken, and leaned my head through it. I listened to the inside for 30 seconds to make sure I was alone. Then, after hearing nothing, I went to the front door. The door was unlocked and already slightly cracked open, so I just pushed it wide open and walked in. The inside was decaying all around. Disturbingly, there was still stuff in here from whoever owned it all those years ago. The living room had an old sofa, all torn up and dusty, and there were several picture frames that had fallen off the walls and shattered. I walked through the first floor, looking at all the left-behind things, curious about what I'd find out about this place. The floor was small, though. After just a minute or two, I went upstairs to the second floor. The stairs were creaky and shaky. I'm surprised they hadn't caved in already. The second floor had a hallway with 2 rooms. One of the doors was open and the other was closed. I looked into the open one. The room was empty, which was strikingly different from downstairs. I stepped in and moved my flashlight all around, but was interrupted when I heard a thud below me. My heart immediately started racing. It didn't sound natural, like a noise the house would make. I hurried down the stairs and waved my flashlight all around. The house was so quiet now, and I didn't see anything moving that could have made the sound. Having that bad gut feeling though, I told myself I should just leave. Usually with my friends I explore with, we always say at the first sign of anything sketchy, we leave. Being alone, I definitely wasn't staying. I quickly walked down the hallway, still moving my flashlight all around. But when I got to the front of the house, the door was shut. I had left it wide open. I hurried up to it and pulled the handle, but it didn't move. It was locked or bolted closed on the outside. I immediately started to panic, knowing someone else had to be here with me and just locked me in. I ran over to the broken window and jumped out. I didn't see anyone as I sprinted into the woods, turning my flashlight off and staying off of the path. My heart was still racing as I walked between the trees, but then a light came from ahead. I was confused and moved behind a tree. It was a red and blue light flickering at the end of the driveway. There were 2 cop cars cutting through the thick grass and driving toward the abandoned house. They passed by me, rushing to the front of the home as I remained hidden. Something in me knew that they weren't there for me. I watched for a minute, then ran out of the woods and back home. I don't know who else was there, or why the police were rushing toward the house. I tried to find out more information on it in the coming weeks, but never found anything released to the public. Whatever was going on in there, or whoever was in there, must have been pretty bad. I'm lucky to be here right now. This was in spring of 2021. I'm a 24-year-old male, and at the time I'd been living away from my family while I was studying at an out-of-state college. Our school had a fairly early spring break, which meant I'd get to go home and visit my family. It was about a 2-day drive to get there, and mostly through long, boring roads. I'd take the drive over flying any day though. I left on a Tuesday morning. I actually woke up early and hit the road well before I planned to, so I was doing great on time. I didn't have the route really planned out though. I just had a general idea of where I'd be making my first overnight stop at. I drove almost 10 hours straight, only stopping for food and gas. Around 8 p.m., I decided I'd done enough for today, and at the next gas station, I pulled up the map and looked for the nearest hotel I could stay at. I was in the middle of nowhere, but I knew there had to be something within 20 to 30 miles at least. Thankfully, I found one. It wasn't too far actually. The directions told me to go down the road behind the gas station, away from the highway. This road looked very old and had very few streetlights that didn't do much for lighting up the road, and there were no cars coming down. I drove about 5 minutes, passing through a very small, old-fashioned town, and at the end of the street was the hotel. It was a small building, just as old as all the others. I parked in the empty parking lot, then grabbed my bags and walked inside. The lights were very dim, like weirdly dim, and nobody was at the counter. As I stood there, I just looked around. It was so quiet. No kids running around, or TVs on in the lobby. It was just empty. After a minute, someone finally came walking down the back hallway, and she looked startled when she saw me. She quickly walked up to the front counter and greeted me, then got me a room for the night. I thanked her and walked down the hallway. She gave me the room all the way at the end. I unlocked it and got in. I didn't even unpack anything really. I just sat on the small sofa and went on my phone for a while. The room wasn't very big or nice, which I wasn't expecting anyway. This was clearly just an older and smaller, probably family-run hotel. I remember just laying on my back on the sofa, scrolling through videos on my phone, and I guess falling asleep. I woke up abruptly to someone banging on the room door. I quickly sat up, shaken by how sudden and loud it was. My eyes looked over at the clock on the wall. It was 11 p.m. Concerned, I got up and walked over to the door, opening it. Nobody was there. I poked my head out and looked down the hallway. I stayed there for 30-ish seconds, really confused and waiting for someone to come back around or something. But the hotel was really quiet still. Everything was so off, I started second-guessing myself. Like, was the knock even at my door? It sounded like it was, and I didn't hear anyone else in any of the rooms near me. But maybe somehow it was for one of the other rooms. I went back to the couch for a little bit, then took a shower and got ready for bed. I set an alarm for 8 a.m. and fell asleep. I really wanted to sleep good tonight, because for one, I was really tired, and two, I had another long drive ahead of me. However, I woke up again in the middle of the night to someone banging on the door. I jumped up again, and this time I hurried up to the door. The whole room was dark, and I could only see the sliver of light coming out from under the door. I swung it open, but nobody was there again. I did the same thing, looking down the hall and listening. After a minute, I decided that this was too strange to not investigate a little further. Tiredly, I walked down the hallway and to the front desk. It was just as dark and quiet as it was when I first arrived here. The woman was still at the desk though. I told her someone had been banging on my door and asked if she saw anyone. The woman looked really confused, and almost as if I was joking. When she realized I wasn't, she then said that I was the only guest staying here tonight. I just smiled and said okay, then started walking back to my room. I don't think it had really set in yet. Like, was I just going crazy? I got back to my room and went in. I made sure that all the locks were in place, then got in bed. I just laid there for a minute, staring at the pitch black ceiling and trying to think about what was going on, before I decided to grab my phone from the nightstand and maybe watch a video or two to get me to relax. However, right when my screen turned on, it lit up the room just enough for me to see something in the corner by the bed. I jumped up and backed away from the bed. There was someone there, standing in the dark in the back corner of the room. They were still, motionless, just watching me. My heart was burning from how hard it was pounding in my chest. I hurried over to the door. As soon as I began removing all the locks, I heard them start rushing up behind me. Their loud footsteps against the floor got closer and closer as I finally swung open the door and sprinted down the hallway. The front desk woman jumped when she saw me, but her eyes quickly darted past me. The man was running up behind me. She started calling 911, but just when the guy got into the lobby, he sprinted out the door. He didn't get into a car or anything. He just ran off. The woman explained that she had no idea who that was, and that he should not have been inside the hotel, again saying that I was the only guest checked in for the night. Police came and did a rather quick investigation. The hotel only had 2 working cameras, one in the lobby and one outside, so it wasn't all that useful. The only thing we know is that the man definitely slipped into my room while I was asking the woman about the knocking. We don't know what he wanted from me, or why he was even there at all. I got my things and left that night, obviously not wanting to stay any longer. I still have no idea what that was about, but it was definitely the most terrifying experience of my life. It was 2016. I lived with my 2 best friends, who I'll call Jason and Andrew for privacy. We were all roommates in an apartment in the city while we finished up our last year of college. Because we were all in school and had jobs, we didn't often have a lot of free time. When we did though, our usual activity that we all enjoyed was hiking, or I guess just exploring in general. Sometimes we'd go on trails, or just drive to a random town we hadn't been to before and walk around. This week, we all had Friday and Saturday off, so we wanted to find something to do on Friday night. Andrew had happened to hear from a friend earlier about this decommissioned factory on the outside of the city. It sounded cool, or interesting at the very least. None of us had done something like this before though, so we were all hesitant, but in the end we said screw it, and just decided to check it out. We hopped in Jason's car and drove to the edge of the city. We live in the Midwest, so the city sort of abruptly ends and turns into flat land that goes on as far as you could see. That was basically where this factory was. We didn't know its exact address, if it even still had one, but we found it on Google Maps using the satellite view. We parked a block away at a gas station, then got out and walked the rest. The whole street to get there was empty. No cars or people anywhere. It almost felt like the entire block was abandoned. The factory building was way bigger than any of us were expecting. It was massive, with railing-type structures all over the outside, and tons of graffiti in places I don't even know how people were able to get to. The chain-link fence had barbed wire across the top, but in several spots it had clearly been cut open and moved from others sneaking in. We crawled over and made our way up to the metal door at the front, which was already open. As soon as we stepped inside, chills ran through me. The whole building was swaying, and the metal was creaking and groaning. It was windy outside, so it made sense, I guess, but it still added to the eeriness of the place. All the lights were off, of course, so our only light was some cheap flashlights Andrew had lying around his house. This main room we were in was full of huge rusted machinery and narrow pathways between them. We all stayed in that room and kind of just wandered around. Eventually, I wandered to the end of the room and into a hallway, but before entering, I checked over my shoulder and saw one of my buddies was not too far behind me. I couldn't tell whether it was Andrew or Jason because they were in the dark by one of the machines, but I figured they saw me, so I was good to keep going without risking splitting up and getting lost. I started walking down, making it to another metal door and going through it. Just as I was walking into the next room and the door started closing, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway from the end I had just come from. Thinking it was Andrew and Jason, I kept walking and shined my light around the room. There were more machines, like a conveyor belt type thing, in the middle of the space, but along the ceiling was a walkway, or a catwalk, and I could see a ladder hanging down on the other side. As I was looking, I heard the door open and close behind me. I called out my friends' names and turned around to tell them what I saw, but when my light hit the door, they weren't there. There was no one. I almost thought I was crazy for a second, but I knew I heard the door open.
Andrew? Jason?
Their names rang across the room, but they didn't reply. I started carefully walking over to the door, feeling my mind start getting worried. I opened the door and shined my light down the hallway. It was empty. What the hell? I didn't have time to think before hearing a slight crumble on the ground behind me. I whipped my light around. Standing maybe 6 or 7 feet from me was some deranged-looking man. He had long hair and a messy beard and these strange, glazed-over eyes. He instantly started sprinting at me, like he was trying to tackle me. I backed into the hallway and slammed the door on him, then sprinted for the other end. I could hear my buddies calling out to me, like they were trying to find me. I ran into the room and yelled at them to leave. We all ran out. We made it to the fence and left. I explained to them what happened on the way back to the car. Whoever that guy was hiding in the building had followed me into the hallway and into the room where I was alone. Obviously, he was trying to wait for me to split off from the group before attacking me. what he really would have done. I'm lucky to have not found out. Since then, we haven't tried anything like that again. This was a Monday night. I'd gotten out of work at 8 and went straight home to hop online and game with some of my buddies. I had gotten divorced a few months ago, which left me with just an empty house and not much to do outside of work. So gaming with my friends all night was mostly all I did, and I can't say I didn't enjoy it. Anyway, I knew there was supposed to be a big thunderstorm overnight, and there were even flash flood warnings. But around here, they pretty much send out those warnings every time it rains, so it was never a big deal. At about 11 p.m. though, I was in the middle of a game with my buddies when a sudden massive gust of wind slammed against the window next to me, and the entire house shook. I took my headset halfway off, and I could hear rain pouring down, and the house creaking and swaying violently. I turned back to my screen to tell everyone what was going on, but suddenly my screen and all the lights in my house flicked off for a split second, then right back on. I saw I was still in the Discord call, so I asked if they could still hear me, but before I got an answer, everything cut out. My PC shut down and all the lights snapped off. The whole house was dark. I couldn't even see my hands in front of my face. I felt around my desk for my phone, then turned the light on. Annoyed, I got up and walked downstairs and up to the front window. Honestly, it was hard to say if everyone else's power was off or not. I could barely see anything through the flood of rain that was pouring down, and most people's houses would usually be dark by now anyways, since it was so late. I quickly sent a message in the group chat saying I probably wouldn't be on for the rest of the night. Frustrated, I used my little phone light to find my way to the basement. I went down and found my old battery bank. It wasn't much, but it was enough to plug a few lamps into so I could at least have some light. I grabbed it and started walking back up to the stairs when I thought I heard something behind me. It was just a bunch of boxes back there, but the wind seemed to pick up as soon as I turned around, so I assumed it was just the storm making the house make noises. I hauled the battery bank up to the first floor and plugged in one of the lamps in the living room. I'm not sure if this is normal or not, but I hated going to bed with the power out. Like I had to wait for it to come back on before I'd feel comfortable sleeping. So I opened up the blinds and sat on the couch, then took my phone out and used my data to scroll through YouTube. An hour or so went by before I got curious again, and this time opened the front door to look outside. My porch had an overhang that blocked most of the rain, so I stepped out and looked around. The storm was still raging on, but the houses across the street didn't seem to be off power. At least a couple of them had a light or two on in the windows. Now I was pretty confused. I looked up outages in my area, but didn't find much info. I went back inside. Oddly, only a minute later, I got a text. It was from a normal, unknown phone number, but essentially said that there was down power lines and to expect power outages. I had no clue why I got a direct text though, and the number didn't have an ID, like from ComEd or whatever. Strange, I thought, but I didn't look much more into it. I went back to the couch. Again, I was on my phone, but more so to just listen to videos while I watched the storm out the window. But then, I heard something from the other side of the house. It sounded exactly like a footstep on one of the creaky wooden steps to the basement. I'd lived here long enough to recognize that sound. I got up, but walked slowly and quietly over there. wanting to hear if it happened again. The house was so dark, and my phone light only lit up a small view in front of me. I turned the corner into the hallway and shined the light down. Nothing was there. However, the basement door was open, like wide open, and there was no way I left it like that. I walked up and shined the light down the stairs, but there was no way I was going to go down there to check anything out, not with no power on. I closed the door. I don't think I had enough time to really think about what this really meant. I walked into the next room. Light from the thunderstorm flashed in the windows, but when I looked around, I found nothing. A feeling built up in me though, like something was off, and my gut could sense it. I started to walk back, when suddenly heavy footsteps came running up the basement stairs. Even behind the closed door, they were loud and shook the whole floor. Without thinking, I ran up to the door and slammed my body against it. Not even a second later, they were on the other side trying to open it. Once they figured out I was there, they started hitting it and ramming their shoulder into it to try to force the door open. This was a regular basement door, so it had no lock on it. I didn't know what else to do. He pounded against it for a minute, but when I pulled my phone out and started calling 911, he stopped. I heard his footsteps go back down the stairs, and I took this chance to get in my car and leave. I tried to watch from the other side of the road to see if he left, but during the 10 minutes I waited, I didn't see anything. 3 officers went in and found nobody inside. He had left through the back door. What I find most disturbing about this situation is that we confirmed the text I received about the power outage was fake, like from a private personal phone. So whoever this guy was that broke in, he knew enough about me to find my phone number. He wasn't targeting just some random house. We think he texted me once he heard me go outside, probably knowing I was checking if other houses had power, and wanting me to not get suspicious and check the breaker box in the basement. There was no outage. He had shut off my power. That's about where it was left though. No new info on who it could have been or what they wanted has been found out. This was nearly 5 years ago from when I'm writing this. I was in high school at the time, and my best friend was a guy named Colton. We hung out most days after school and just found random places to go to hang out at. Anyway, this was right after our school let out for winter break, so we had a ton of time and nothing to do. We spent this whole day just chilling at his place and playing Xbox, but we eventually got bored. We felt like walking around or going somewhere. Now, our whole town always knew about this creepy church that sat at the end of a deserted road. It was kind of blocked out by trees since they stopped keeping up with it. It had been abandoned for as long as I'd known about it, but even though we always knew about it, it had never really come across our minds to explore it. When I was a kid, I was always terrified of it, but for some reason now, I was a little bit more intrigued. So when me and Colton were walking around the edge of town and happened to pass by the deserted road to the church, we decided to check it out. At least to walk down the road and see what it looked like nowadays, and if nobody else was there, maybe look inside. It was already dark out, but the moon was bright enough for us to still kind of see where we were going. We also had our phones on us in case we needed a flashlight. The road was awful. It was cracked and had thick vines and bushes growing between the pavement. By the time we got to the end of it and looked back, We couldn't even see the street we'd just come from. Looking at the church, though, it was way creepier than I'd remembered. It looked like the forest had engulfed it. Even the fence going around the courtyard was almost unrecognizable because it was drowning in the tall plants that covered it. We made our way through a broken section. It was very quiet as we approached the church. We didn't see any lights or hear anything to indicate anyone else was here, so we walked up to the large entrance door and pushed it open. The sound it made was like bending wood, creaking and scraping its way across the floor. It echoed through the whole room. Both of us stayed at the doorway for a minute and just looked from there. What was really odd, and also kind of creepy, was that the whole room, full of rows of benches, looked almost untouched. There wasn't any debris anywhere, or even graffiti like you'd expect from an old place like this. I stepped in, and Colton followed behind me. I slowly walked down the aisle, just looking around at everything. Each step we took echoed throughout the vaulted ceilings, but when we got closer to the end, there was a sudden thud. It rang through the whole church. Both of us jumped and quickly got our phone flashlights out. We couldn't tell where it came from, though. The sound kind of took over the whole building and echoed all around. We stood still and moved our lights around, looking for anything that had caused the sound, but we really saw nothing. Colton thought he saw another room closer to the entrance, and maybe something had fallen over in there. Regardless, we kept exploring. I walked to the end of the hall where the podium was. I stood up there and looked back down at the way we came. It was so dark by the entrance, even my light couldn't reach that far. After a minute, Colton said he wanted to check out the other room, so we both headed over there. On the side wall was a door. I opened it and shined my light in. From just a quick look, I couldn't tell what the room was. We walked in and looked around. There were chairs stacked up against the wall and a bunch of boxes everywhere, like storage or something. While we were in there, we heard a subtle sound. We both stopped moving. It was a light thump, and then another. It sounded like someone walking down the aisle we just came from. Both of us froze up. The sound was coming from the podium area, walking down toward the entrance. We could only see out the thin crack in the doorway of the room we were in, but we stared at the darkness out there and waited as the sound got closer. Then, for a split second, someone crossed through the dark and out the front entrance door. The footsteps then stopped, and we held our breath as we waited, before we heard the door creak closed. We looked at each other in fear. Neither of us knew whether to try running away, or hide, or what to do. We ended up just waiting in fear for several minutes, until we thought whoever it was had left the area. Then we sprinted out of the room and out the entrance. We didn't stop running until we got down the deserted road and onto the street. We don't know who was in there, but they came from the end of the church that I had just been at. There was no doorways over there, so they had to be hiding or something, somewhere right next to me. That is, if it even was a person. At this point, years later, I can't even say anything is for sure. This was last year during a solo road trip I was taking from Wisconsin to Montana. Most of the roads there are basically barren, aside from the first hour and the last hour. Everything else is forest or open fields, maybe some small mountains too, once I got further west. Anyway, because of how I had everything scheduled, I was going to be driving through the night and most of the day. rather than taking up 2 full days of driving and having to spend on an extra hotel in between. I knew it would still be tough, but I thought it was worth it. I started the drive at 7 p.m. I double-checked I had everything packed into my car and had my snacks and stuff in the front seat with me. Then I headed onto the road. First hour was through the city and small towns, but then it was open road from there. Barely any cars, and not many places to stop, aside from a gas station every 15-ish miles. By hour 2, I'd only used up a third of my gas tank, but with the gas stations seeming to get further and fewer between, I figured I'd top off before entering the really rural section of the drive. It took 20 minutes before I finally found a station to stop at. Nobody else was there. It was just some really small place with 4 gas pumps. The convenience store wasn't even open. I pulled in and parked next to a pump, getting out and starting to pump the gas. I don't know if it was because the place was older, or maybe hadn't been filled up in a while, but the gas was coming out really slow, like almost a whole minute just for 1 gallon to come out. I leaned up against my car and just waited. That's about when another car came down the road. The speed limit was 55, but it looked like they were only going 20 or 30, initially passing the gas station, but then slowing down and backing up. That was strange, and honestly a bit dangerous on a single road like that in the middle of the night. But they backed up to the entrance and pulled into the station, parking at the pump right behind me. I figured they just missed the entrance and really needed gas. I stayed looking forward at my pump as I heard someone get out and walk to the side of their car. But after a minute of not hearing them starting to pump the gas, or even move at all, I glanced over to see what they were doing. The man was wearing a gray flannel and black jeans and was relatively tall, and he was staring at me. Like when I looked over, he was already looking at me. I awkwardly smiled and nodded, then looked away again. I couldn't help but feel like he was still looking at me though. After a good 10 seconds, I finally heard him grab the pump and put it in his car. I felt relief, like maybe he was just getting gas, and I was overthinking it. I was out there for another minute before deciding I'd waited enough and just took the pump out and locked up my gas cap. When I did, I saw the man looking at me again. His eyes were so dull and heavy, like he was tired, but chugged caffeine or something. I got in and pulled back onto the road. Weird guy, I thought, but I didn't put too much weight on it. At some point during the next 3 hours of the drive, it started raining. I'd now been driving for 5 hours total, and it was just past midnight. The rain made me feel like I had to pay more attention to the road, which in turn made the drive more exhausting and tiring. I tried opening an energy drink and snacking, but it really didn't help all that much. By 1 a.m., I just needed a break. My gas was starting to run low too. I drove down the long barren road until finally there was a gas station to pull off at. It looked pretty run down and was just as empty as the last one, but still had lights on and everything. I pulled in and filled up my tank, then pulled into the side of the small building and parked in one of the spaces. I looked up the weather to see how long the rain would last, and I looked up any nearby towns, but there were none. It looked like I was basically right in the middle of nothing. I ended up deciding I was good to take a 30-minute nap just to refresh myself, and hopefully the rain would slow down too. I leaned back and fell asleep. When I woke up, rain was still slapping against the roof, and my alarm hadn't gone off yet. It had only been about 25 minutes. I sat up and looked out the windshield. The whole place was quiet, but there was a car at one of the pumps. I leaned forward and looked closer. It was the same one from the other stop. I was almost sure of it. Either this was a really big coincidence, or something was wrong. Even more odd, the guy wasn't anywhere I could see, not in his car or outside. I felt my face start to go pale. Where the hell was this guy? There was nowhere else at this empty gas station that man could possibly be at. Whatever this was, I didn't want to stay to find out. I turned on the car and put it in reverse, but when I looked in my mirror as I backed out, I saw him. Not behind my car. He was in my back seat, eyes piercing through the dark at me. I jolted forward and kicked my door open, jumping onto the pavement. The car was still in reverse, so it was slowly backing up. I started running, but I never heard the man get out of the car. I ran into the woods, then watched as my car continued to roll back for a while, then suddenly stopped. A second later, he drove away, leaving me stranded at some unknown gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was then I realized my phone was still on the dashboard. I stood there in shock for a minute, standing in the rain and taking in the reality of the situation. Then I looked over at the car. He just left his own car. I walked over and found the door to be unlocked, keys in the ignition, and random groceries in the back seat. And by some odd chance, I found the phone laying on the floor by the passenger seat. It was locked, but I was still able to call 911 on the lock screen. I didn't realize it at the time. I guess I thought whoever stole my vehicle was just stupid and left everything behind. But this car wasn't theirs. It was also stolen. Everything in it was from someone else that the man had done the same thing to as he did to me. Though from what I heard, they weren't as lucky to get out completely unharmed. When talking with investigators, they seemed to think the man didn't sneak into my back seat and let me start leaving for no reason. Likely, he was going to wait until we were on the road to reveal himself, and who knows why he would want me hostage, or what he planned to do. He was never found, and neither was my car. I live in northern Utah, on the edge of a small highway town. There's not really anything but a few stores, truck stops, and motels right up along the main highway. The roads to the outskirts are all dirt, just leading to a few other homes and large private acres of forest and grassy fields. This was a pretty typical day for me. I worked remotely from home and finished up around 6. From there, I headed into town to grab some groceries and stock up on a few items around the house. Even though it was a highway town, the highway wasn't actually all that busy, so none of the stores were ever too crowded. I pulled in and started shopping. While I was in there though, I happened to notice a guy looking at me. At first, I thought nothing of it. I probably just looked over at him at an awkward timing while he happened to be looking over at me. I kept going about my shopping, but a couple minutes later, and in a different aisle, I saw him again in the corner of my eye. He walked into the same empty aisle I was in and stood just 5 or 6 feet to the side of me. I kept looking forward and tried to find what I needed, but I noticed he wasn't really moving around or grabbing anything, so I just shifted my eyes a little bit over so I could kind of see him better. Even though I wasn't looking directly at him, I could tell he was looking at me. This time I said hi, then continued about my business. The man didn't say anything back to me. I hurried up and grabbed what I needed, and left the aisle. Honestly, I just thought the dude was a little weird, but I wasn't thinking too hard about it. I went to the checkout counter and paid for everything, then headed back out to my car. I parked in the far back of the lot, like I usually did. I tossed everything in the trunk and got in, and when I looked up at the rest of the parking lot, there were maybe 30 or 40 other cars, but something felt off. Then I saw him again. He was standing between a couple cars, looking over in my direction. He didn't have any groceries in his hands, so I don't think he even checked out or got anything. The hell was up with this guy? Probably some creepy trucker running on 2 hours of sleep or something. I pulled out of the parking lot and started heading home. The sun was mostly down by now, so the empty dirt roads were dark and quiet. I parked out front and brought in the first couple bags of groceries. While putting that stuff away, I got a little sidetracked by a phone call from my dad, but eventually I got back to it and headed back outside to my car to grab the rest of the groceries. When I did, I saw something. I had to squint and let my eyes adjust to the dark for a moment, but far out and kind of off the side of the dirt road, there was a truck. Its lights were all off. I could only see the general shape of it, silhouetted by the night sky. I own just under 40 acres of land, so where that truck was on my property. It definitely wasn't there when I drove home, and if it was just turning around or lost, why would it be parked with no lights on? I slowly walked up to my car and got my groceries out, keeping an eye on the truck the entire time. The best possibility I could think of was that it could be just some regular driver that pulled off the highway and thought that this empty land would be a good place to sleep instead of paying for a motel. Even though it was on my property, I wasn't going to make a fuss if I didn't have to. You never know who could be in there or what they might do. I went back inside. After tossing the groceries away, I opened up the curtains on the front of the house, just so I could keep an eye out there. Over time, say the next hour or so, I felt less and less nervous about it, and thought that it was almost surely a driver sleeping. Still strange, but harmless. I spent another hour in the living room, watching a show, and never saw the truck move. It was getting late, so I closed the curtains and went upstairs to get in bed. I think I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, in the middle of the night, I woke up having to use the restroom. I never checked the time, but I think it was probably 2 or 3 a.m. I got up, half asleep, and walked across the bedroom floor and into the hallway where the bathroom was. As soon as I opened the door, I heard a creak downstairs. I'd never heard that happen before. I listened for a second, then closed and reopened the door to see if it happened again, but it didn't. I walked to the end of the hallway and looked down the stairs. It was all dark down there, only a small amount of moonlight coming in from the kitchen windows. But there was something in that downstairs hallway. I could see a shadow moving ever so slightly on the side of the wall. I couldn't tell if it was actually in the hallway, or maybe outside the back door, and the shadow was just reflecting onto the wall, but I immediately felt my heart pumping. I quietly backed up and went back into my room, closing the door as slowly and carefully as I could, so as to not bring any attention. Then I got my phone and called the police. I kept my voice low. For the first 5 minutes I waited, I didn't hear anything. I started doubting that they were in my home, until suddenly I heard creaking again. Very slow and very subtle, walking across the floor below me. It sounded like they went into the living room. A minute later, a cop car showed up. There was a scurry of footsteps running around down there, and eventually leaving my home just as the officers ran up. Thankfully, they caught him running back up toward the truck that was parked in the field. Disturbingly, I recognized him as the creepy guy from the store earlier. I guess he really was stalking me. Even worse than him following me and breaking into my home, he was armed. The guy claimed he was just trying to rob me, but from the looks of it, it seemed way more personal than that. And I don't know how long he was inside my home for, but he never took anything. He didn't even have a backpack to take anything with. Plus, he knew I was home. He probably was watching me from somewhere outside all night. What he really would have done is better left unknown. It was 2019. I was a sophomore in college and did babysitting 3 to 4 nights a week as a means for paying off my car. For about a month, I had this 3-year-old boy that I'd watch once a week. The parents were soft-spoken, but friendly. They'd always leave around bedtime, so all I'd have to do is make sure the kid stayed asleep and was okay while they were gone for usually 4 to 5 hours. This night, I pulled in at 8 p.m. I said hi to the parents, who mentioned the kid was already in their room asleep. Then they thanked me and left. I never asked what they did, going out this late every week. I think they mentioned one time that they went to the city. Maybe it was like a date night or something. Anyway, I put my bag down and did a walkthrough of the house, like I usually did, then sat on a chair in the living room. They'd always say feel free to watch TV, or cook dinner or whatever, but usually I just sit on my phone to pass the time, occasionally walking by the kids' room to make sure they were okay. Not even an hour in though, I got a call from the mother. I obviously answered, but I was confused when she asked if I called her just now. I said no, I was still at the house and hadn't called for anything. I guess she had gotten a call from an unsaved number, but nobody said anything when she answered. She thought maybe I'd gotten a new phone, or was using a different one or something, and the call just didn't come through correctly. I assured her we were all good here, and she said okay, and hung up. I thought nothing of it. She was probably just a concerned parent wanting to make sure everything was good. I did another check on the kid, then sat down again. About 20 minutes passed. I was still on my phone watching a video when I saw headlights shine into the front windows. The light came in through the cracks between the blinds. I thought it was just a neighbor pulling into their house, but after a couple minutes of the light not shutting off, I got up and peeked out the window. There was a dark gray sedan parked right out front of the house by the curb. It was old and rusty, and the windows were blacked out. I was so focused on the car for a minute, I almost didn't even notice the guys standing a few feet from it. They were closer to the end of the driveway, standing near the sidewalk and looking up at the house I was in. I was a little concerned, but I didn't want to confront them since it wasn't even my house, so I just watched from the window. After a minute, he walked back to his car and got in. Oddly, they pulled away very slowly, like they were still focused on looking at the house. I watched as their headlights went down the road, cutting in and out of the trees, but then they stopped again. I could see the light between the trees staying still, far down the road. Then it shut off, like they had parked and got out. Maybe it was someone visiting a neighbor and they were trying to find the address numbers and got mixed up somehow. Feeling like it was a little strange, I stayed by the window for a good 5 minutes, but I never saw the man come back down to the house, so I figured it was probably just a weird coincidence. I went back to the chair in the living room. I did think about texting the parents, but didn't want to worry them about something that was likely nothing. Plus, it probably wouldn't have made a difference to anything anyways. I decided to turn the TV on, keeping it on low volume so I didn't wake up the kid. A few minutes in, I went to open the blinds as well, because I found myself still thinking about it. A whole hour and a half passed, or maybe even 2 hours. Nothing really happened during that time. I just waited in the living room with the TV on and tried my best to stay awake. My eyes were getting heavy, and I could tell I was half asleep. Like I was still awake, but just fully spaced out, and my eyes partially open. But through my less than aware state I was in, I randomly heard a light thump. It didn't fully wake me until I heard it again. My eyes opened wider, and I got up. I wasn't sure what it was, but I wanted to check on the kid first, so I started walking to the stairs. But when I passed through the hallway, I heard it again and saw something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head. There was someone outside the back door, pulling on the handle and looking right at me. Once he saw me looking at him, he started pulling on the handle even harder, trying to brute force it open. My adrenaline kicked in, and I sprinted up the stairs. I went in the room and got the kid, trying to keep them calm. As I was up there, the thumps got louder, like now he was using something to rip open the door. With the kid in my arms, I hurried down the stairs. When I got to the bottom, there was one more sound. It sounded like cracking plastic and metal. I went back into the hallway toward the front door, but I saw the back door was open and the man was rushing inside. He had regular casual clothes on and dark hair. That was all I saw before I noticed a knife in his hand. He didn't hesitate to start running at me. I rushed out the front door, getting into my car and backing out just as he got up to my window. I drove to a safe place and called 911 and the parents. Of course, he was gone before anyone got there. The way I see it, I think the man was going to threaten me with the knife, or even harm me, so he could kidnap the kid. That's what it felt like was going to happen. But how'd he know the parents would be away? And why kidnap this kid specifically? What's weird is after all of it, the parents stopped talking to me and never hired me again. They thanked me on the night of the incident, but then went radio silent. It was like they didn't want me to find anything out about what happened. I did my own research, but didn't find much. Only thing I found out was that the mother had been married before to a man that looked somewhat similar to the guy I saw. No way to know for sure though. I'm just speculating. It's been years now, so I don't think we'll be getting any answers. This was during a road trip last summer. I was taking a long route home from visiting a few relatives, so I was driving about 4 hours each day to a different destination. This was after my last stop. Everything left on the last 8 hours of driving home was just empty woods as far as I knew. There was another city I wanted to stop at, but it was just too far out of the way for me to justify stopping there. From my previous stop, I left at 6 p.m. to get to my final Airbnb that I had booked at a cabin about 2 hours away. It happened to be on the route home, so that's why I went with it. I figured it'd be better than whatever cheap and crappy motel there was along the road. Where I was, the landscape was pretty flat, but there were a decent amount of trees scattered around. When I pulled up to the cabin, it was clear they had planted a row of large pine trees perfectly in a line at the front of the cabin, with the gravel driveway going through the middle. Honestly, the outside of it, mixed with the landscape, was a little bit spooky. I parked and unlocked the padlock with the code I had emailed from the host. Despite the outside, on the inside, the cabin looked newly renovated, probably to be an Airbnb, but it was really nice. Small but cozy. I didn't unpack much since I'd only be there for the night. I sat at the table and ate a meal I'd picked up from a drive-thru. But only 10 minutes after I'd gotten settled in, there was a knock at the door. It startled me because I'd never heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. I got up and answered the door. There was a man, looking about 40-ish, with a gray and black beard and shaved head.
Hi, I was just stopping by to make sure you got in and everything was good,
he said with a smile. Knowing it was just the host now, I said I was good and it was all great. I then said goodnight and shut the door. I thought it was a bit strange he showed up unannounced just to ask if I was okay, but I thought he must have lived close by or maybe even on the other side of the property or something. Also, it's worth mentioning that the guy had an unusually strong odor coming from him. It smelled like maybe he'd been working out in a field all day. I just found it a bit odd as well. I went back to the table and finished eating. then took a shower to wind down for the night. I was only in there for maybe 5 minutes before feeling tired enough and just wanting to lay in bed already. I dried off and hopped in bed, staying on my phone for a little bit, when there was another knock at the front door. This one scared me just as much as the first time, because again, I never heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. It had to be the host again, but why? And so soon after he just came over. Immediately, I knew this was odd, and I felt really uncomfortable. I checked my phone, and of course, there was no text or call from him. I slowly walked into the main room, hearing him knock several more times. I wasn't sure if I wanted to answer the door or not, but I ended up just calling out from the other side and asking what he needed. He stopped knocking.
Can you open the door, please? I just wanted to ask you one more thing. I'll be quick, I promise.
I didn't respond for a few seconds, because I honestly didn't know what to say. In those few seconds, he must have gotten impatient, because he knocked on the door again and asked if I could open it. I said it was late and I wasn't in the mood, so if there wasn't an emergency, then I'd like to be left alone. He took a long time to answer after that. The silence was really eerie. Once it reached a whole minute, it was even more so. I didn't hear him walk away, so was he just standing out there? I quietly walked up and looked through the small window on the door. He wasn't out there. I immediately thought that he must have snuck away, because surely I would have heard his footsteps on the gravel if he just walked away. But then, where was he? I didn't know what to do. I felt really uncomfortable and didn't know why he was acting so strange. I stood there by the door for a minute and listened for anything. Honestly, I was scared to move. But then, I happened to glance over at one of the windows in the living room. I saw his eyes staring into mine. I panicked and sprinted to the bedroom, where I called 911. While I waited, I heard what sounded like him trying to lift open the window, which was terrifying, but also odd, considering he had to have had a key to his own house. But that's when I figured it all out. That man wasn't the host. This was confirmed when police arrived. He'd already run off. We have no idea in which direction, but we got in contact with the actual host and owner of the cabin. I don't know what that man's intentions were that night. Obviously, he was lying and clearly plotting something, but I'm just glad I didn't open the door. This was last year in the middle of January. I live in a relatively small home in a small woodsy town. It was about 45 minutes outside of the city. I only had a half day of work, so this night I was free to chill at home. Around 7, I got an unexpected call from a friend. He said he was having car troubles and asked if I could do him a solid and give him a ride home. Maybe grab some food too. I didn't mind at all and said I'd be right over. This wasn't the first time this had happened, so we'd been through this before. I grabbed my jacket from the front closet and got my keys, then opened the front door to leave. As soon as I opened the door, my whole body jumped. There was a man standing right in front of me on the porch, like literally a foot away from the door. He had a heavy coat with a black gator neck scarf covering his lower face. The man didn't move at all though, like he wasn't equally as startled as me. For a second, I was just embarrassed for getting spooked like that, but then I immediately got curious why he was here. Before I could ask, he apologized and said he was just about to knock. I said it was alright and asked what he needed. The man took a second, then asked if I was David, or Daryl, I don't know, something like that. Whoever it was, wasn't me. I said no, and the man just said okay and started walking off the porch. I stepped outside and shut and locked the door behind me, making sure the man walked all the way down my driveway and away from my home before I got in my car. I pretty much thought about that weird encounter the whole drive to my friend's work. My home was in a secluded neighborhood. Like, you don't get random people just going up to people's houses very often because they were so deep in the woods with long driveways. If he was just someone looking for someone else, I guess that did explain it though. I picked up my friend and we grabbed a quick meal at Culver's, then I drove him to his place and dropped him off. It was around 9 p.m. by this point. It was snowing just a little bit, but otherwise it was pretty calm outside. When I got home, I pulled into the driveway and walked up to the front door, unlocking it and getting inside. I took a moment to warm up, then hopped on the couch and turned the TV on. I didn't keep track of time after this, because I didn't have to work tomorrow, so there was no need to. If I had to guess, I was probably on the couch for 2 hours before I got tired. I got up and stretched, turning the TV off and starting to walk over to the stairs. But when I passed by the front door, I suddenly remembered that guy that was outside earlier. I'd pretty much forgotten about it up until now. Now that I was thinking about it though, I walked up to the door and looked out the peephole just to ease my mind. Nobody was on the porch, and the night still looked calm, still snowing and not very windy. However, after a second, I noticed something going across the driveway. It wasn't clear, so I had to open the door to get a better look. There were shoe prints in the thin layer of snow. They seemed to come all the way up the driveway from the road and near my car. Then they walked off into the yard where the trees blocked my view. Immediately, I felt very unnerved. I shut and locked the door. If this was the same guy as last time, coming back again, then something was seriously wrong. I kept looking back out the windows as I tried to think of what to do next. Thinking back on how strange my interaction with the guy was earlier only made it worse. In the moment, I was concerned enough to call the police. I dialed 911 and stayed by the window as I explained my situation. As I was talking though, I kept hearing something subtle. Every time I'd pause and listen, I wouldn't hear it anymore. The operator probably thought I was crazy. But about a minute into the call, there was a violent thud against the back of the house. I almost dropped my phone from how much it made me jump. I hurried over to the hallway, hearing another loud thud as I looked down. There was someone outside the back door. With the reflections of light from inside the house contrasted with the dark outside, I couldn't see anything but slight movement behind the door. Another thud crashed into it. It was heavy. They definitely had some kind of weapon or something to break the door down with. The operator told me to either find somewhere to hide and lock myself away, or find an escape. I decided to grab my keys and sprint to my car. Even though I knew the man was behind my house, it was still terrifying running out into the open. There could have been more than one person, or even someone waiting by my car. Thankfully, there wasn't, and I was able to get away. It was a good thing I left, because when the cops got there, the back door had been beaten open, and watery shoe prints filled the house. But nobody was inside. All I could really give the officers was a description of the man who was at my doorstep, which there was no actual evidence of it being the same person. So if they did find him, it wouldn't do much anyways. But they never did. Whether or not it was him though, I think I got lucky that I ran into him on my way out of the house. Had I not, I wouldn't have checked out the door before going to bed. If I was asleep already, maybe they would have been more subtle with breaking in. I don't know, but what's so unnerving is that this all happened on just an ordinary day. There was no way to know. It could be any day that something like this happens. With him still out there, sometimes I feel like I'm just waiting for it to happen again. It was spring break. I was 18, and this year my family took a trip to a small cabin out in Minnesota. It was just me, my mom, and my younger brother, who was only 7 at the time. We were planned to stay at this cabin for the whole week, and part of the reason we were going to Minnesota was to check out some of the smaller towns and scout for a place we might want to move to in the future. Anyway, the cabin my mom booked we had never been to before, and I don't think she knew how far out it was from the closest towns. She was probably more concerned on the price. It was really far north, and about 35 minutes out from any shopping areas. I guess it was a good test at how good we'd handle the rural life though. The drive there was a little over 10 hours. I drove the first few hours, and my mom drove the rest. We got to the cabin at sunset. It was really pretty, the orange skies setting over the dense forest and wildlife. Way different than the skyscrapers and massive office buildings we were used to. The cabin itself was noticeably old, however. Everything creaked, and it didn't look like the place was professionally built. It was fine though. I mean, it was a cabin after all. We settled in for the night, testing out the wood-burning fireplace and just resting after the long drive. I ended up napping for most of the evening. My mom went to bed around 8:30, but because I took a long nap, I stayed up a bit later. My little brother was also in his room, so it was just me hanging out in the cabin. I sat by the fireplace on my phone for a bit, then thought I'd get some fresh air and check out the back porch. It was a really small wooden deck with a sketchy looking fire pit in the middle and a few chairs around it. I sat down and looked out into the forest. The night was really quiet. No cars or busy streets, just the occasional bird crowing in the distance and the trees rustling in the wind. I loved it. Being further up north though, it was a bit more chilly than I expected. I spotted some logs stacked up on the side of the cabin and figured I'd give the fire pit a try. I lit it up no problem, and the fire stayed well maintained in the center, so I guess it wasn't as sketchy as I thought. Anyway, I sat by it for a while. I never get to do this sort of thing, so I just soaked it all in. After about 30 minutes of being outside, there was a very sudden and just completely out of nowhere sound from within the forest. Honestly, I had no clue what it could have been, but I did think that the way it sounded and echoed through the trees was kind of like an axe chopping into a tree or wood. It was only one sound though, and I didn't think it was really possible for anyone to be out here near us. It was pitch black out there, so I couldn't see anything, but whatever it was, it sounded pretty close. As I stayed out there for the next 5 minutes after hearing the sound, I felt my nerves building up a little bit. Just this uneasy feeling that ruined the peacefulness from before. I ended up snuffing out the fire pit and heading back into the cabin. From the sounds of it, my mom and brother were asleep already. I still wasn't all that tired though. I don't know if it was still from the long nap, or maybe the sound I heard waking me up, but I still didn't really feel like going to bed yet. I stayed up in the living room on my phone. I had some movies downloaded, so I didn't have to worry about Wi-Fi. Only 15 or so minutes in, I heard something. I paused the movie and listened. I wasn't sure if it was the cabin creaking from someone waking up or walking around in their room, or maybe just wind hitting the walls. It gave me that uneasy feeling again though. I wasn't used to being in this kind of environment, so I think that's why I got so easily unnerved. It was only a minute later that I heard it again though. This time it was from the opposite end of the cabin, not where the bedrooms were. It was from outside the wall, just next to me. The only thing there was a window. I leaned a little closer and listened. Just when I thought I might be hearing something, a loud sequence of knocks shook the front door. It vibrated across the wooden walls. I froze up for a moment, then heard my mom get out of bed and hurry into the hallway, asking what that was. I was standing up at this point, knowing something was wrong, but told her someone was at the door. I could tell she was pretty frightened too. She immediately went back to get her phone and call 911 because there was no reason for anyone to be banging on our cabin door in the middle of nowhere and in the middle of the night. As she did, I walked up to the door and looked out the peephole. It was extremely dark. There were no porch lights or anything, but I could see the basic figure of a man standing fairly close, just staring ahead at the door. And in the dark, I could see the outline of a heavy wooden axe in his hand. I felt my eyes widen and nerves spiking. Everything rushed through my mind. I tried to think of any reason this wasn't what it looked like maybe he needed help or was lost, or I don't know. Nothing seemed to explain this as being anything but bad. The man banged on the door several more times as my mom was on the phone with an operator. They never spoke though, stating any excuse for them being here. They just aggressively knocked on the door. In the heat of the moment, it was hard to tell how much time passed. It felt like forever though. But then he did what we were all terrified of. One loud crack slammed into the door, and the slightest bit of the metal axe pierced through the wood. At that point, we all ran into the farthest room and locked ourselves in. We heard more hits against the door, but only 4 or 5 before they stopped. We weren't sure if he'd busted the door down already, or if he had given up, but we just waited. It took just under 15 minutes for the first officer to arrive to the cabin, which was honestly quicker than expected, given how far out we were. The front door had several large gashes in it, but there were no signs of the man having gotten in. There were also no signs of where the man went. It's just assumed that he walked back out into the forest. The running theory is the guy was out in the forest when he saw my campfire from all the way out there, luring him to the cabin. It doesn't explain what he was doing out there at night with an axe, or why he came up to the cabin, but there's not really any way to know those things without him being caught and questioned. We obviously didn't stay there any longer. In case you were wondering, we didn't end up moving there either. This was in 2015. I had taken a road trip to a forest a few hours from me. There was a hike up to an abandoned fire lookout that I was really excited to explore. I should mention it was technically illegal to go inside it or camp in it, as it wasn't kept up with and could be structurally unstable. I'd done some research online though, and most people said that it seemed okay, but the last post I could find about it was 3 years ago. So I really didn't know what I'd find when I got up there. Anyway, I found a small ditch on the side of the road that I could park in. Then I got out my backpack with 2 days worth of gear and started the hike. With trips like this, there aren't usually defined paths to get there, so I used a handheld satellite GPS that allowed me to make sure I was going the right way. But really the whole time I was just cutting through unknown terrain in the woods. The hike from the road was about 4 to 5 hours. The further in I got, the more dense and rough the terrain got. I was really banking on the fire lookout to still be intact and good enough for me to camp out in, but I guess if not, then I was just gonna have to find somewhere else nearby to set up my tent and sleep at. After the pretty tiring several hours of hiking through the woods, I finally got there. I could see the building peeking out above the trees, and when I got closer, it actually looked decently in shape. The paint was worn off, of course, but it seemed to be holding up well. I gave the support beams a few pushes, and they were really solid, so I tried my luck climbing up the ladder. It was metal and felt sturdy, but still creaked with every step up. When I got to the top, I was in awe for a moment at the views. I could see basically the entire forest. There were no buildings or roads or houses for miles in all directions. It was just the woods. After taking in the view, I went around the ledge and inside the lookout. It was really small, not like one of those big ones that you see get turned into Airbnbs or whatever. This was just one room, maybe 150 square feet. It had a decaying bed in the corner and an old wooden desk in the other corner, with rotting windows spanning the entire wall. There wasn't too much else to look at in there, so I put my bag down and rolled out my mattress and sleeping bag, then heated up a meal on my mini camping stove. Once the sun was setting, I walked out to the ledge and watched it. It was by far one of the best views I'd ever seen. I felt like it went by quick though, and then it was just darkness. It was cloudy out too, so no moonlight or stars were lighting up the sky. With nothing else to do though, I stayed sitting out on the ledge for a while. It was probably an hour into the night when I saw something below me. There was a light moving around in the trees. What was strange about it though was it wasn't like an artificial light. It had this orangish hue and was kind of flickering, kind of like a campfire would, which led me to believe it was a torch. It was moving between the trees in the forest, not too far from where I was. The chances of someone else being out here at the same time as me in such a remote part of the woods were really slim, given there wasn't even a trail to get here. Also, traveling around at night without a normal flashlight and using a torch was pretty odd. I watched as the light moved under the trees for a while. Then it went behind something where I could no longer see it. For the next 30 minutes, I never saw it appear again. I still stayed out on the ledge though, taking in the calmness and quietness of the night. Eventually, the wind started to make it a bit cold, so I stood up to take in one last view before heading inside. When I looked below the ledge though, someone was there. They were standing at the bottom in the grassy area between the fire lookout and the woods. It looked like they were looking directly up at me. Maybe it was the person with the light I saw earlier.
Hello?
I called out. I didn't know what else to say. They didn't move or say anything back to me. It was just this strange 10 or 15 seconds of looking at each other before they lifted up their hand, like in an acknowledging way or apologizing. Then they turned around and walked into the woods, still with no light on. Obviously, that was incredibly creepy and eerie, but for some reason in the moment, I felt so sure that it was just another hiker wanting to stay in the lookout. It was probably just looking up, trying to see if anyone was inside already. Why he hesitated to respond and only lifted his hand up, I don't know. I stayed outside for a little longer, but not seeing anything else, I went inside and got my sleeping bag to warm up. It was a little bit hard to fall asleep because of the wind hitting the windows and the wooden beams creaking under me, but eventually I did manage to pass out. It's hard to really know how much time passed, but when I woke up, the wind had settled down and it was still very dark outside. I opened my eyes, wondering why I was suddenly awake, but then I heard a familiar sound. The soft metal creak of the ladder outside. I sat up, thinking I must be mistaken, but then I heard it again and again. Someone was climbing up the ladder. I couldn't tell how far up or down they were. I could just hear the hinges at the top of the ladder creak with every step up they took. Outside the windows, though, It was completely dark. I unzipped my sleeping bag and got up, heart racing as I grabbed my backpack and walked onto the ledge. During the 20 or so seconds that it took to get up, the creaking got louder and faster, like they were hurrying, before it suddenly stopped just as I made it out to the ledge. I stood in place for a moment, waiting for another sound. Then I slowly walked around the walkway and peered around the corner at the opening to the ladder. No one was there. I carefully walked closer and felt my heart rate increasing as I leaned over and looked down. Nobody was on the ladder. I was just in shock for a second, confused and scared and unsure what the hell was going on. Then, a sudden sequence of footsteps came rushing around the wooden walkway behind me. I only caught a glimpse of their dark figure running between the windows on the other side. I didn't hesitate to lower myself onto the ladder and hurry down. It was terrifying, trying to climb down the slippery metal ladder as my whole body was shaking from the adrenaline rush, with someone chasing right above me. I got halfway down before I saw their head peer out from above. I didn't stop until I got to the bottom and into the woods. Honestly, I don't know why I even grabbed my backpack when I got up to see what was going on, but it was the best decision I ever made. Maybe even saved my life. With my flashlight and GPS on me, I was able to hike my way out of there and back to my car. As far as I know, I wasn't followed. I drove away and never looked back. This was a couple years ago when I was working 2 jobs to save up for a condo. I had a stable 9-to-5 full-time gig, but did deliveries as a way to make a little bit extra cash whenever I had time. Actually, I found myself doing sometimes 30 hours a week, just doing deliveries every day after work. This night, I started after getting dinner at 6:30. It was a pretty good night, to be honest. I was getting a lot of good orders with good tips, so really I should have just taken the rest of the night off and given myself a break. But I was greedy. I kept working, hoping to continue getting well-paying orders. By the time it was 11, it had slowed down a lot, and the last few orders I'd done were just average. I really wanted to end on a good one though, so I kept driving around until one came up that was decent. Finally, when one did, I quickly accepted it. Almost $20 for a delivery 15 minutes away. Who wouldn't take that? Once I got the food, I started heading to the address. The roads were of course very quiet and empty at this time of night, so the drive there was smooth. However, it took me toward a wooded section of town that I wasn't even aware had houses in it. I made sure I was on the right route several times though, just to be sure I was going the right way. When I got to the final turn, it was on a well-maintained gravel road going into the forest. I drove a little ways down until there was a gate. It was one of those small ones, basically just 2 pillars on either side of the path, with a chain running between them. The chain on these wasn't up though, so I drove through. My headlights weren't the best, so I couldn't see too far ahead, but not too long past the gate, I pulled into a parking area. I was confused. It definitely was not leading to a house. I pulled into a space and put my car in park, then looked out my windows all around. There was a sign on one end. This was a forest preserve. I'd done deliveries to parks and whatnot before, but I always thought forest preserves were closed up at like 8 or 9, and I didn't see anyone here to deliver the order to. Just as I was starting to question what exactly I was supposed to do here, my phone started ringing. It was the customer. I picked up. The voice on the other end was a deep male voice, very gravelly and rugged, almost to a point where it was hard to understand them. He said he saw on the map that I'd parked and asked if I could see him. I said no, to which he explained he was camping with some buddies down one of the trails, and I should be able to spot a campfire if I walk a little closer. I said alright, realizing this was probably why the tip was so large. I did mention to him that I thought the forest preserves were closed, but he said this one allowed overnight camping on certain days. I wasn't a big outdoorsy person, so I didn't know any better. I didn't see any reason he'd have to lie. I turned off my car and got out with his bag of food. I quickly realized that it was really dark and I needed to use my phone as a flashlight to see where I was going. There was only one trail leading out from the parking area, so at least I couldn't get lost. I started walking. It was really quiet outside. I expected to hear the group of guys talking and laughing in the distance, but I didn't. It was just the wind and crickets. Then I saw the light, an orange flame glowing and flickering out in the trees. Oddly, it wasn't on the path though, or right off the side of it. It was far out of the way and amid all the trees. I couldn't see too far down the trail to see if there was a direct path going to it or not, but I just started walking straight to the flame. As I got closer, things were getting really strange. First of all, I didn't hear any voices, and secondly, once I got even closer, I didn't see anyone. It was just a small campfire burning in the middle of nothing. No chairs, no tents, literally nothing. I barely got the chance to whisper what the hell under my breath before I heard a stick snap from somewhere out in the trees. I jolted my head toward the sound. There was someone there, but too far for the light to reach, and the faint figure that I could make out was standing still, like they were trying not to be seen. I felt really uneasy.
Hey, I'm the delivery driver. I'll just put your order down over here.
I yelled out and set the bag on the ground. As I did, they suddenly decided to show themselves and walk toward me. The man was tall, with dark hair and a scruffy beard. He apologized and said he didn't see me walking up. It was that same deep, gravelly voice from the phone. His smile was disturbing, like he was faking it, and it was really strange that he only showed himself once he knew I saw him. Nothing added up. I stumbled over a few words, but as he got closer and closer, I just decided to turn and run. He called out several times in this creepy, overly nice voice, asking me to come back and that he had cash for me. I didn't stop until I got to the car. I fumbled around with my keys in my shaky hands as I tried to hurry in and turn it on. I backed out and pulled back onto the gravel path to leave, but had to slam on my brakes. The chain was latched across the pillars now, blocking the exit. I stared at it for way too long, trying to think if I could get out and unlatch it, or what to do. Then I heard footsteps coming up behind my car. I didn't even look, I just floored it onto the grass and made it around the pillars. It was a tight squeeze, because there was a short ditch really close to the sides, so if I messed up, my car would have slid down and maybe gotten stuck. Once I was back on the gravel, I sped away. I didn't know what that was back there, but I was stupid not to call the police. Even though I think that if I did, they likely would have been long gone anyway. The following morning, I did a little investigating and found that the forest preserve I was at did in fact close at 8 p.m. and never allowed camping or campfires. To me, that confirms the horrible nature of the situation I was in. What he intended to do is unknown, and still haunts me to think about what could have happened in the forest that night. I was camping at a small lake for the weekend. Really, this wasn't supposed to be anything special. Just a few days in the woods by the water to relax and nothing more. The first day was exactly that. I got there, set up camp, and chilled for the whole day and night. This was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It had a thin footpath leading to it, but it wasn't marked on any maps online or anything, so only locals would probably know about it. My dad used to take me here when I was a kid. In all my years going out to that spot, both as a kid with my dad and as an adult by myself, never once was anyone else here. Honestly, there was never even any signs of anyone else ever having been there. Anyway, on my second day, I spent my time walking around the water and I guess just thinking to myself, I must have circled the lake 3 or 4 times. During those hours of walking, everything was quiet and nice. But then, on one of my laps around the lake, I happened to spot some footprints in the dirt, just on the edge of the tree line. I had been walking the same circle over and over, and never saw them before. Where they were, it was so clear and obvious, I don't think I would have missed them. They also looked pretty new, and what was really strange was not only that the footprints meant somebody else was out here, but that they were literal footprints. Like barefoot, not shoe prints. The part of the lake I was at didn't even have any easy access to the water, so it's not like they took their boots off before going for a swim, not to mention I would have seen them in the lake. Seeing this really creeped me out for some reason. Why didn't I see them nearby while I was walking around? Were they watching me and didn't want me to see them? It was hard not to get paranoid about it. From what I was able to see, it looked like the footprints went up to the tree line looking out at the lake, then right back into the woods, where it seemed to go straight back for a while. I didn't want to follow them into that unknown territory of the forest, so I just walked back to my campsite. I kept looking out to the lake, or I guess the tree line around the lake, seeing if anyone was out there. I never saw anyone. As the sun started to come down, the paranoia started to build up again. Something about the footprints just felt off, and knowing that they were likely still nearby, it wasn't a comforting feeling. When it got darker, I fueled up my campfire with a good supply of wood and sat around it. I did whatever I could to keep my mind off of it, but it was pretty difficult. Part of me felt justified in feeling uneasy, and another part of me felt like I was overreacting for no reason. But not too far into the night, I heard footsteps approaching from the trees. I instantly turned and faced the darkness they were coming from. There were more than one. It sounded like 2 people, slowly walking closer to my campsite. I stared in their direction until they suddenly came into the light. It was a man and a woman walking next to each other and stopping just at the edge of where the light from the fire could reach. I couldn't see much of their faces, or really anything more than their basic shape. I couldn't even tell how old or young they were.
Can I help you?
As soon as I said that, the woman turned and sprinted back into the woods, completely disappearing. But the man stayed where he was. He didn't move or even look back at the woman. It was about then that I looked down and realized he wasn't wearing any shoes. These were definitely the ones who were out by the lake. I asked again if I could help him, but then he too turned around and quietly walked back into the woods. I pretty much had an internal freakout after that. That was the most unsettling and strange encounter I'd ever had, almost not even feeling real. I didn't want to be in those woods for another second. I immediately started to pack my things. I'm not the kind of person to stick around when things get sketchy. Thankfully, my setup was easy to put up and take down, so I had everything tied down in my bag and ready to go within a few minutes. I didn't know where they went, but I didn't want to still be here if they came back. I kicked out all the unlit logs from the fire, so it would burn out soon after I left. Then I hurried into the woods. The walk was nearly 2 hours. For the first 10 minutes, I was really on edge, unsure if I was being followed, but the further away I got, the better I felt. It was about 40 minutes into the walk. The whole woods was silent, not even any crickets or anything, when I suddenly heard running footsteps nearby. It was in the distance, maybe 100 feet from me, and it was definitely a person. I couldn't see anything though, so I had to just keep walking. Only a few minutes later, I heard it again, this time on the other side of me. The footsteps seemed quieter than they should have been, too, which led me to believe that they were running barefoot, and that it was the same two I'd seen at the lake. If they'd been stalking me this far into the woods, who knows what they were trying to do. For a while, I'd keep hearing running footsteps in the distance, just short bursts, like they were quietly stalking me, and then suddenly sprinting away. I can't think of anything that would have been more terrifying than that walk through the woods. Somehow, though, I made it back to my truck. I was able to make it out of there. I wish I had more to say, or that I figured out who that man and woman were, or what they were doing out there. But I have nothing. Maybe I'm insane, but sometimes I wonder if they were even alive or not. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. I never went back. I work at a data center. It's at a small warehouse/office place. My job is to just stare at a monitor and make sure all the systems stay online. If anything goes down, I head to the operating rooms to usually just give it a quick restart. It's a really simple and easy job, and because it's overnight and just me, I can really do whatever I want, so long as I'm constantly checking the status of all the systems. Although, I'm sure you can tell just how boring it can get sometimes. By the time this happened, I'd already seriously considered quitting several times, but forced myself to stick with it. Anyway, this night I drove over to the office at my usual 10 p.m. The building was at the end of a long road and backed up to trees, so there were never any cars or people in the area. I parked and headed up to the office. This week, I had a show on Netflix that I'd been binging for my entire shifts, so after giving the computers a few checks, I immediately set up my laptop and started watching my show. For reference, there's usually no trips in any of the systems during my shift. Since it's overnight, there's less of a load on everything, so it's less likely anything will happen. I'd say maybe twice a week there would be an outage, and it'd only be a single system that I can quickly just restart and get working again. I think I got through just about 2 episodes of my show, so it was about 2 hours in when I saw a notification pop up on the monitor. One of the systems lost connection. I paused the show and got up. I walked downstairs and through multiple corridors until I got to the huge storage room that was the main hub of the data center. There were massive rows of shelves all throughout the room. The notification I got had a row and section number. I walked down the aisle and over to the correct section. It happened to be the very last row and the section on the far corner, and strangely, it was really obvious why it was down. The main power cable wasn't plugged in. It was laying on the ground like it had been pulled on or fallen out somehow. I really didn't know how that was possible. In all my years of having the job, I'd never seen a heavy-duty cable randomly fall out like that. It just doesn't happen. Regardless though of however it happened, I plugged it back in and booted up the system. Everything came back online and seemed to be working properly. The obvious and really only answer to fall back on was that it did somehow just wiggle out of the sockets. Maybe over time it slowly shook out, and it just so happened to fall out tonight. I did a quick walkthrough of the rest of the aisles, checking for anything else while I was down there. Then I started heading back through all the corridors and back to the office. As I was in one of the corridors, I heard an unfamiliar sound. It was almost like a heavy door thumping closed in a doorway. It was a little creepy sounding, especially with there being no other sounds in the entire building. Unfortunately, I didn't really know the rest of the layout of the warehouse, so if it actually was a door, I had no way of knowing which door, or where at. And although it sounded like a door, it very well could have been anything else. This was a massive warehouse, and often the metal pipes would bend and creak in the walls, or make similar thump sounds. It was just that exact sound I hadn't heard before. I made my way back to the room and sat down. I double-checked the systems again, then continued my show. Only a few minutes passed by, and I'd barely even gotten through one scene before I heard what sounded like a couple of fast-paced footsteps scurrying through the corridor next to me. It gave me a quick jump scare, but I got up and opened the door, looking down the hallway. There was nothing there, just an empty corridor with a door on the far end, but it sounded like it was just outside of the office I was in. I knew I wouldn't be able to keep my mind off of it if I didn't take a look around. I walked toward the end and opened the door. When I did and looked down the next hallway, I barely saw the door on the other end closing, like someone had just went through it. My heart was pounding now. I cautiously walked further up and opened the door. This one led to a hallway with multiple office doors in it.
Is someone in here? Hello?
My voice echoed through the corridor. I took a few steps inside. It was eerily quiet, not the slightest sound throughout the building. Were they hiding in one of these office rooms? As that thought creeped into my head, I got really unsettled and decided not to go any further down that hallway. I took one step back toward the door, but just when I did, one of the office doors next to me swung open. I only caught a glimpse of a man running out of the unlit room before I turned and booked it out of there. I could hear his footsteps echo behind me as I made it to the next corridor and into the staircase. I didn't want to risk getting trapped, so I took the fire exit door and just ran out into the parking lot. Once I got closer to my car, I started calling the police. Whoever was in there didn't chase me out the same exit though. The cops made it pretty quick and did an extensive search of the entire building, which took nearly half an hour. But the guy was gone, probably ran out a different exit and into the woods behind the building. Him being in there explained a lot though. The wire that had been disconnected earlier in the night was on the corner section, which the man probably bumped into while sneaking around. The company I worked for did a huge investigation to review security footage and try to figure out how he got in and if he stole anything. I didn't get much information on it, however, because I'm not authorized. I think it's pretty clear that whatever he was in there for, he likely didn't want me to know and was probably planning to prevent me from blowing his cover. How he would have done that after leading me through the corridors, I'm fortunate enough to not know. I'm a 24-year-old female from northern Arizona. This was a couple years ago. At the time, I was living out of a small camper van, traveling along the west coast. There's a lot of different lifestyles people like to live in these types of vans, or RVs. I always tried to keep out of the big cities and stick to small towns for camping in between destinations, but for the most part, I liked to camp out in the backcountry. Being in the middle of the woods, with nobody else around, was where I found myself most comfortable, and where I most enjoyed the lifestyle of traveling. I think part of it is that it was always safer to be out by yourself in the forest than it was to be stealth camping in a busy parking lot in the middle of a city. Don't get me wrong, it can still get creepy at night, but I always know I'm better off out there with nobody around. This week, I was slowly traveling between two big cities in Washington. I was taking my time, staying on the back roads and hunkering down at campsites for several days at a time. On this day, I pulled off the road and onto a small dirt trail going deep into the forest. There were a few pull-off spots, but none were taken, and it looked like nobody had been down here in a while. So I kept going, hoping to secure a larger and more scenic spot. At the end, there was a large circle to pull off on. It wasn't scenic, just surrounded by trees, but it was large and secluded and peaceful, and even had a stone circle in the middle for a campfire. I leveled out my van and parked. Since it was the middle of spring, it was raining pretty much every day here in Washington, so there wasn't much for me to do outside. I opened the side door to my van for some fresh air while I cooked a meal on my propane stove. It was around sunset, so I still had several hours before I'd be in bed. Over the next 30 minutes, the sun fell past the horizon, and the rain started picking up. I shut the door to keep the water out, and instead cracked open one of the small windows near the back of the van. I sat on the bed and watched a show on my laptop, but midway through it, a glare came in from the open window behind me. It was a light reflecting onto the screen of my laptop. Before I was able to react, it went away. It didn't move away though. It turned off, as if someone switched the light off. When I turned around and looked out the window, I saw nothing. It was really dark and still pouring down outside. I had no way to know how far the light came from, or what it even was. Being on a trail with other pull-off spots, I had to assume it was just another camper, maybe their headlights that somehow found its way through the trees and shined into my window. Then they quickly turned their vehicle off. The only problem with that was the light didn't come from the road I came down. Behind my window was just trees. Maybe there was another trail I didn't know about. There wasn't much investigating I could do anyway, so I turned back around and went back on my laptop. Occasionally, I'd check out the windows, or think I'd heard something outside, but with the rain clanking against the metal roof, it wasn't clear if I was actually hearing something or not. Every time I looked though, I never saw anything to confirm that something was out there, so I didn't worry myself too much. I want to say it was about 10 or 11 when I decided to call it in for the night and try to sleep. I turned off everything in the van, closed all the windows, and drew the shades. It was nearly pitch black inside. I got under the covers and tried to sleep. Usually, I didn't have much trouble at all, but tonight I just couldn't manage to fall asleep. Unfortunately, the rain picked up even more after an hour, and thunder started rolling in. It was very loud and made it impossible to even try to sleep. About 2 hours into the night, and through all the harsh rain and thunder, I swear I heard something move outside. It was just loud enough for me to know I really heard something. It sounded like someone or something running and kicking over a branch on the ground, somewhere just outside of my van. As soon as I heard it, there were no other sounds. It was so dark, I couldn't even see the ground beneath the window. The longer I looked out there, the more uneasy I felt. I just had this feeling like someone else was looking back at me. I put the window cover back down. I sat there and tried to tell myself I was overreacting, but only a minute later, I heard a voice. It was a male voice, kind of in a loud whisper, like they were talking to someone else. I sat in silence, too scared to open the covers and look out the windows again, knowing they'd probably see me if they hadn't already. However, they likely already could assume someone was in the van, which makes it all the more terrifying. There was a good 2 or 3 minutes where I didn't hear anything aside from the rain and thunder, before there was suddenly something outside the sliding side door to the van. It sounded like bending plastic, like someone was leaning against the side door. Then there was a knock. A few seconds later, they knocked again. Even though I was sure they knew I was in here already, I still was too scared to speak. Maybe they weren't sure how many people were inside, or if I was a man or woman, so I felt safer not giving them anything and just staying quiet. A very disturbing and anxious 5 minutes went by as the knocking continued every few seconds without anyone saying anything. They had to be drenched by now and probably couldn't see at all through this weather. But then they finally said something.
Sheriff's Department, open up.
What? I didn't believe that for a second. If it were true, why wouldn't they have said that from the beginning? They continued knocking and calling out different lines, all basically stating that they were an officer and I needed to open the door. This seemed like a desperate attempt to get me to open up without violence. I slowly lifted the window cover and looked out. All I could see was a dark figure moving near the door, but from the shape of it, it didn't look like he had any sort of law enforcement gear on, so I was sure this was about to get really bad. I debated in my head what to do for 30 seconds, as it felt like the knocking got more and more impatient, before I decided to risk getting into the driver's seat and trying to drive away. As soon as I went up there and turned the car on, I heard 2 sets of footsteps running up to the side of the van. I began pulling out just as a figure appeared in the window next to me. Thank God the van didn't get stuck, and I was able to get out onto the trail. As I drove away, I never saw any other vehicle down the road, which makes the intentions of these unknown people likely really disturbing. I put in a report with the county, who of course said no officers were out there that night, but I never got any follow-up. Things could have gotten really bad out there, but I haven't had anything else happen since then. I worked at a local pizza shop in my mid-20s. It was just a small place that did deliveries and had a few tables inside for dining in. In all honesty, the food wasn't that great. The only thing that was really special about the place was that it was open 24/7, so any not-so-sober people would usually come in all throughout the night. I often worked alone, but I didn't mind it. Actually, I preferred it. None of the food was hard to make, and whenever it was slow, I could usually do whatever I wanted while waiting around. This night was no different than any other, at least to start. I headed in at 9 p.m. and took over for the day manager. There were no special tasks or anything that I had to do that night, and with it being a Tuesday, I was prepared for a chill night. I prepped some of the workstations in the back and just waited for any orders to come through. I got a few customers in the next couple hours, but then it went radio silent. No walk-ins or calls. I pretty much sat on a chair in the back of the kitchen and scrolled on my phone the whole time. But around 1 a.m., I heard the bell by the door ring, which happened every time someone opened the door. I got up and walked to the front where the counter was, but I stopped as soon as I could see the main room. Nobody was in there. I stood in place and looked side to side, but there wasn't anyone at all. A short smile broke across my face as I walked further up and quadruple checked that nobody came in. I found it funny, like I must have been so used to hearing that sound all night long that my brain was playing tricks on me now. Being sure it was nothing, I went back to my chair in the kitchen. I really didn't think about it at all after that. For the next 15 minutes, there were still no calls or customers, until I heard the bell ring again. This time, I wasn't even watching a video when it happened, so I knew I actually heard it. I got up and walked into the main room, but stopped in confusion again. Nobody was in there. After a second, I walked up to the front door and opened it, sticking my head outside and looking up and down the sidewalk that went along the building. There was nobody out there. not even any cars in the parking lot. I wouldn't say I was really scared or creeped out, but more so just really confused. I messed around with the door for a little bit, trying to see if it would ring without opening, but it didn't seem to. This was really weird, but I didn't know what else to do about it. I stayed up front for a while, at least 30 minutes, waiting for the door to ring again, but it never did, so I went back to the kitchen. It was between 2 and 3 a.m., which was always the slowest time of the night. Unsurprisingly, once I was in the back again, only a few minutes went by before the door rang again. This time, I stayed sitting and listened for anyone. I didn't hear anything, but just to be safe, I called out.
Hello? Is someone out there?
I got no response. I figured it was just the door doing whatever the hell it was doing, so I just ignored it and stayed back and continued on my phone. Somehow, there wasn't a single customer for a whole hour after that, so basically the past 3 hours were completely dead. It was 4 a.m., so for my last hour, I had to start prepping everything for the next shift. I got up and went to the front. I started counting the register from the few orders I had at the beginning of my shift, but while I was there, I felt strange. Something just felt off. I kept looking up at the empty room ahead of me and back at the kitchen behind me, feeling like I was being watched or something. I thought it was just the unusual nature of the night I was having, with the door and everything. I was just thankful my shift was over soon. Another couple minutes went by when I suddenly heard a thump on the floor behind me. It was just like a boot stepping on the ground, which instantly sent a chill through me and made me quickly turn around. I felt my breath leave my lungs. There was a man standing just 5 or 6 feet away from me. He had all black, ripped up clothes and a hoodie draping over his face, stopping just above his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot and hollow. I don't know if he was drunk or high or what, but he clearly wasn't sane right now. Then I saw his left hand was holding a knife. His knuckles were white from how tightly he was clenching it. I stayed motionless, trying not to escalate anything, but after several seconds of him not making a move and just staring at me, I decided to speak.
Hey, listen, you can have the cash from the register. I won't say anything. Please just let me go,
I said, trying to say anything I could to get out of this. He just stood there though, still clenching the knife and having that 1,000-yard stare. Honestly, I think I was even more terrified because he clearly wasn't some normal guy. There was no predicting what he might do. The counter I was at was L-shaped, extending toward the back where he was, so to run away, I'd actually have to run a couple feet toward him and around the counter, then back toward the front door. With him only being 5 feet from me, he could easily grab me or attack me if I tried. So I did the next best option. I basically dove over top the counter. It wasn't pretty, but I guess it kind of worked. I slammed into the ground and got up. The guy was already sprinting at me with a face of uncontrollable bloodlust and rage. I ran out the door and only got a few seconds away before I heard him get out the door as well. He was too close for me to even try getting inside my car, which was behind the building. I just kept running, making it to the road and hoping a car might drive by and help. But at some point, he stopped chasing. I don't know when, because I was so focused on sprinting and not looking back. I called the cops and waited at the road for them to get here. It took about 5 minutes. The guy was gone, but I guess after chasing me, he went back inside the shop and just demolished the place. Everything was trashed, and he left out the back door, where he then scraped his knife all over the side of my car. It's likely he was watching me inside the shop through the windows from a distance, and using the door as a distraction, hoping to slip in without being noticed. Admittedly, it worked perfectly, which makes me feel pretty dumb. It's also pretty creepy, knowing that there was about an hour gap between the last time the door rang and when I saw him, so he was probably hiding inside the shop that whole time. It's really strange though, because I really had no idea who he was. I really thought he was just some random guy, but his actions seemed oddly directed toward me. Maybe it was just a wrong place, wrong time sort of thing. I don't know. They never found him. I didn't stay working there very long after that, fearing that he might come back.